this as a new permit, not any kind of a straight pro forma renewal. So we're putting enhanced scrutiny on it and also giving the public extensive opportunity for input. And lastly, I just want to leave you with this. Tonight will be very helpful. You'll hear some excellent opportunities for input and also some good presentations from us. But we're not going anywhere. We're here for the long haul. When sort of the news of this facility dies down, we will still be here vigorously monitoring this facility and ensuring that the public's health is protected. So again, this continuation of the dialogue we've had the last few months, but really I want to make sure we have ample opportunity for us to hear from you from here on out. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I know Mayor Keeler has joined us as well as one of our co-hosts this evening. Mayor, would you like to say a few words to welcome folks here tonight? Mayor Keeler, are you available?
Can you hear me, Sean?
Yes, we can, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Sean. First of all, I want to thank Commissioner Sagos and his team at DEC, who we've been working with since early on in March. We appreciate that partnership. I also want to thank the New York State Department of Health, who have been in discussions with us. I want to thank our congressional delegation for their help in seeking answers. And I want to thank Senator Breslin and Assemblyman McDonald for their efforts. And lastly, I want to thank the community that's participating in tonight's discussion. Since we first learned of the incineration of AFFF at Norlite back in mid-February, Cohoes has kind of found itself at the epicenter of a nationwide debate on the effectiveness of the incineration of firefighting foam containing these PFAS forever chemicals. And I just have always felt that it's the number one priority of government to protect the health and safety of its citizens. So I've had a lot of questions. The community has had a lot of questions. And tonight's meeting is an important opportunity for DEC to provide some information and for the public to ask questions directly of DEC. So again, I appreciate the partnership we've had right from the beginning with Commissioner Sagos and his team at DEC. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate you joining us tonight for this great meeting. So if we could go to the next slide, please. We'll get kicked on right away. So we do have a very robust agenda tonight with a number of presentations from DEC experts here. And again, we tailored these presentations this evening to really focus on the questions that we've been hearing from folks and really provide you the information I think that the community is desiring overall. As you heard probably, we are recording this presentation this evening and we will be posting it on our website as well. So folks can go back, share it for those who were unable to attend tonight, and obviously keep this conversation going. So we want to make sure that our experts are heard tonight, and we save time for questions and answers throughout the presentations. Right now, we are focusing, in order to really preserve the audio quality this evening, focusing on questions and answers in the chat function and via email and via phone calls that we've received as well. And again, we've tailored those presentations to address just that. So Regina, next slide, please. So again, we'll, in between each presentation, we will be pausing for questions in the chat function. I do see some questions coming in now, and thanks. We'll obviously get to a number of those as well throughout the evening, this evening. For those of you who are dialed in by phone, there is an email address, comments.norlite2020@dec.ny.gov, that you can use to submit some questions as well. And we'll be, as the presentations go on this evening, adaptively managing this conversation to make sure that we are addressing all the questions we receive and obviously giving folks a chance to be heard throughout the presentation this evening. So for those of you on the WebEx, you can see where the chat feature is, and once you click that chat button, you can type in your questions on the side. Regina, next slide, please. So what we want to do is start with a conversation. As I think the commissioner started off as, we've heard a lot about what are perfluorinated compounds or poly and perfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS for shorthand, as they are known. And these are very widely used man-made chemicals that have been around for a few generations now, and used in a host of industrial to everyday common use products, and because of some of the unique properties that made them very useful in things from firefighting foams to everyday products and Teflon pans to Gore-Tex to others. And now what we found is throughout this use and over time, obviously, since they were so widely used, we are now detecting them in the environment, and we're finding them in surface water and groundwater, in people and in animals. And obviously that has us concerned, and New York State has really been on the forefront of addressing this issue overall. Next slide, Regina. And, since 2016, when this emerging contaminants issue really came to light, New York, through the governor's leadership, has really embarked on a nation-leading approach to addressing these contaminants in the environment. We were the first state to regulate PFOA and PFOS, some of the leading PFAS chemicals that you've heard about, as hazardous substances, which really gave us the power to effectuate response actions on the ground when we found elevated concentrations of these contaminants in the environment. Most folks from around the Capital District here are familiar with Hoosick Falls. Other places like Newburgh and sites on Long Island are obviously some of the areas where we've unfortunately had to respond to these contaminants when they've gotten in the drinking water. And to ensure that we are protecting all residents and drinking water, and you'll hear tonight from Gary Ginsberg from DOH about the exposure pathways and some of the primary ways in which people can come in contact with these chemicals, we've established what are known as maximum contaminant levels for these emerging contaminants in drinking water, and we've set some of the nation's most strictest standards when it comes to ensuring drinking water protection from these contaminants. And when it comes to firefighting foam, once we realized that these compounds were in firefighting foam, we were the first state to prohibit the use and start phasing it out of production and use across the state. And we launched a very comprehensive foam collection program to get these firefighting foams out of fire departments and out of use overall, and stop the spread of these contaminants into the environment. And to be more proactive, we've engaged in a statewide survey, really looking at who the users and manufacturers of these compounds were, where they may have been used, stored, or manufactured in New York, where they may be found on the landscape, and really doing a robust investigation overall to really guide our on-the-ground response efforts. And, on our website, we have a lot of information just that we've collected through the leading science that we've driven and through the response actions. And you can also see our action plan that we've created that really is guiding our efforts overall from a science-based perspective to ensure that these chemicals are not posing a risk to our residents, and anywhere we find them, we are addressing them overall. Now, I know there are a lot of questions about the legislation that's been passed with regard to incineration, and we heard the mayor mention it earlier. Tonight's conversation is really focused on what DEC has done since we found out and discovered that Norlite was processing firefighting foam. We cannot speak to the legislation that is obviously under review by the governor's office. And it's a very, robust process that they undertake to review all legislation. But really, irrespective of that bill, as Commissioner Sego started us off this evening, we've effectively shut the door to this facility processing firefighting foam. And we've also put in place strong protections to make sure that we are exerting the utmost authority over this facility from processing emerging contaminants or anything else. And I know there are a lot of questions just about, how did the facility come to do this? Why didn't DEC know or stop sooner? And I will say, as soon as we did find out, we did embark on a robust investigation to determine what our regulatory oversight over these compounds was and over this facility. And I started off by saying we're the first state to regulate some perfluorinated compounds as hazardous substances. Norlite, as you'll come to learn tonight throughout the presentation, is a hazardous waste incinerator, and there are specific regulations that guide hazardous wastes. They are allowed to process hazardous substances, and those are a different class of chemicals overall, which require different types of notification requirements that are not as stringent as regulated hazardous wastes. And that was something we looked into, but as our investigation really went underway. That's why, as the commissioner said, we stepped in immediately as that investigation unfolded and told them to stop processing that. And through our actions over the summer, we've effectively shut the door from them processing any emerging contaminants moving forward in the future without approaching DEC first. So we recognize that there were some regulatory and legal gray areas in which the facility could process hazardous substances, and now we've taken our actions, as the commissioner said, to really shut the door to that. So Regina, next slide, please, if you could. And when it comes to our oversight, we do have a number of different programs, which you'll hear about tonight, that really guide our efforts to ensure the community is protected and that this facility is complying with state and federal regulations and laws and statutes in place. You hear a lot about the Air Title V permit, which really governs air emissions and the kiln operations and what comes out of the stacks. Again, the Hazardous Waste Management permit that regulates waste fuels and the storage of that on the site. And then, as the commissioner said, you know, this is a dual operating facility, and at the end of the day, it is an aggregate producing facility, and they have a mine land reclamation permit that guides their mining operations. And I know we got a number of questions about the blasting in the community that people hear and feel from time to time. And as we go on tonight, we will provide some information where you can talk to some of our mining experts and flag any concerns that you may have. And overall, DEC does have a very open door policy. We are accessible. As the community newsletter that we sent recently provided, there are phone numbers and email addresses of some of the key experts that you can reach out to anytime that you have questions. And our doors are open for that dialogue, and we do encourage you to interact with the experts and professionals here at the department to get your questions answered. And I know there are questions about DEC's monitor, and we do have an on-site monitor at that facility that provides, in part, our continuous oversight of the day-to-day activities at that facility. And that was really put in place from our enforcement actions and actions that we've taken to really hold the facility accountable for past bad practices. And as you'll hear tonight, you know, we do have a long track record of really effectuating enforcement actions and bringing this facility into compliance and making sure that it is not posing an adverse risk to the Cohoes community and beyond. So next slide, please, Regina. And again, just to reiterate some of what the commissioner said, you know, we stepped in as soon as our investigation was underway and directed Norlite to cease all incineration of firefighting foam at the facility. As you'll hear from Gary Ginsberg at DOH, regarding exposure pathways, one of our primary concerns is obviously water ingestion. Since these are very water-loving chemicals, we know that one of the primary exposure pathways to coming in contact with these chemicals is through water. So we wanted to immediately step in and make sure that nothing had come out of the stacks that could have adversely impacted the nearby water supplies and, you know, potentially put the community at risk. And that's why we stepped in and confirmed that those levels had not changed and there was not a water threat from these compounds. And then that's given us time to really design the sampling initiative, which you'll hear about in a little bit this evening, to really look and see if there was a release into the environment from Norlite's processing of firefighting foam. Mentioned before the permit review process and the greater community engagement the commissioner talked about, and really we want to make sure that your voices are heard as this facility may make changes to its operations or processes moving forward. And again, you'll hear about the comprehensive performance test with regard to the new emissions control technology this facility is putting on their stacks and processes, which again was a result of our ongoing enforcement action over this facility. So Regina, next slide, please. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Gary Ginsberg from our partners at the Department of Health, who's going to walk through, again, a little more in depth about some of the actions that we've taken at this facility over time and some of the health-based protections that we have in place. So Gary, why don't you take it away?
Great. I just unmuted myself. Can I get confirmation of that?
Yep, you're good to go, Gary.
Good. Thank you, Sean. And Commissioner Sagos and Mayor Keeler. Good to talk to you all again. And yeah, I just want to go over with you some of the Department of Health's history related to this site and current and ongoing activities. And it will, I think, provide a little historical perspective on just how long there have been investigations related to Norlite's emissions, and, to focus again on the exposure pathways as Sean was talking about, which, DOH is very concerned with evaluating any chance that there is a community or even just a single receptor near a stationary source such as Norlite, if they are receiving exposures, whether it's in air, soil, water, or food that they're trying to grow in their backyard, whether any of that could lead to a potential increase in exposure that could be a health risk. So that's all part and parcel of how we look at DEC's activities, who is the primary regulator of this facility, but we're there to help out and look at the health side of all of this. So if you can get to my next slide. So our activities go back to at least the late 90s relative to this site, when a human health risk assessment, or HHRA, was being conceived as part of a regulatory activity back then, a permitting process back then for Norlite. And that risk assessment was conducted and then released in 2002. And it took into account Norlite's processes at that time: stack emissions from kilns, air modeling to predict concentrations that would fall out into the community surrounding Norlite. And it took into account exposure pathways such as inhalation, soil ingestion, drinking water, so potential impacts on local water. There was no AFFF in play at the time. This was the routine, kiln-related emissions and what would be coming off of any piles and stacks of materials that are at the Norlite facility, and also any potential effect on or contamination of local foods. And the findings of that risk assessment, that risk assessment wasn't conducted by DOH, but we carefully reviewed the protocol and the results at that time. This was long before I got to DOH, but, I've looked at it again in retrospect, and, that was a pretty tightly done risk assessment, carefully done risk assessment, and none of the cancer or non-cancer risks that were projected were elevated relative to Norlite at that time. So if we roll forward, that was, again, an assessment done by the contractor for Norlite, reviewed by the state of New York, but the federal government, via CDC/ATSDR, which is the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, was petitioned by the community in Cohoes to do a federal assessment back in 2005 as a follow-up to the 2002 risk assessment. And that evaluated, again, inhalation of kiln emissions, ingestion of and exposure to soil, contact with the local waters in the area, and findings, again, were no apparent health hazard coming from Norlite if you were living in the community surrounding it. So that was an independent federal investigation that found that, and they recommended, though, because of some data gaps, that there'd be actual air testing for the fugitive dust, again, particles and metals that could be coming off the Norlite landmass facility and operations. So that was a recommendation that was taken to heart, and DEC did do particulate air monitoring of surrounding Norlite in 2008. That was quite an extensive air monitoring program. over 9 months in 2008. We reviewed the data and concurred that there was not an elevation of PM 2.5, which is a relatively fine, inhalable, deep lung inhalable fraction of particulate matter that is used in regulatory settings. And there were not elevations in the PM 2.5 levels in the surrounding community, as well as a 2018 a community air screen study that was orchestrated by DEC and actually helped out by community residents. And that was focusing on volatile emissions, VOCs, and that also did not find an elevation. So we've been reviewing all of these data streams as they've become available. Next slide. And if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and rolling forward with the understanding now that unfortunately during 2018 and 2019, there was the incineration at Norlite of AFFF foam, and there was now additional testing needs, special testing needs that go perhaps outside of the formal permit testing requirements that have been in place. And so then the state engaged with DEC and with the Green Island and Cohoes to test the water supply for those two communities, as Sean mentioned. There had been a testing round in 2017 for PFAS compounds, not because of AFFF combustion, but just because of general, increasing concern about these compounds and wanting to know which public supplies may have had some contamination, just general surveillance. And there were trace levels found in 2017. Those levels had not changed post the AFFF burning as they were tested this past spring in 2020. So we have also at DOH been involved in the protocol development for the soil and surface water sampling that now is getting ready to kick off, and hopefully we'll get started in the coming days and weeks. And we're happy to be part of the review process of that and make sure that those results are seen from the exposure pathway analyses that we normally would look at these things from. And we've been communicating with the Cohoes mayor, other elected officials, the media, federal, state, and local stakeholders as questions have come up and the health perspective is needed. We can go forward here. Next slide. So we will be ongoing involvement with the permitting process on the human health risk assessment protocol and the final human health risk assessment that you will hear more about as part of the Title V permitting process that will be required of Norlite. And there will be an environmental justice component to that and looking at health outcome data in the relevant zip codes. And, that is, again, up our alley, and we'll make sure that that is done in a proper epidemiological way to look at that health outcome data. And we'll continue to work with DEC on overall permitting and remedial activities, as well as I said, the soil and surface water sampling results that is now being kicked off. And we will continue to make sure that the local water supplies are in compliance with our MCLs. Going forward, the next slide. So switching gears just a bit and talking about DOH PFAS activities in the area of biomonitoring, as well as in the areas of other exposure pathways. We have, unfortunately, we got involved with some high-level PFAS exposures in Hoosick Falls and in Newburgh relative to exceedances of what was the health advisory level for PFAS compounds set by EPA in 2016 in drinking water. And so this led to testing of the blood of residents both in Hoosick Falls and Newburgh for PFAS compounds. And those programs have successfully showed that not only were there exposures, but that the exposures have come down in Hoosick Falls after the mitigation of their drinking water supply. We've also been involved in biomonitoring efforts, again related to elevated concentrations in drinking water on Long Island in 2017. Next slide. And we have been awarded a CDC grant to do more analyses of Newburgh and Hoosick Falls residents. So what I've been talking about just now is biomonitoring. That's mostly on the exposure side. But what are the health outcomes of concern, and are we seeing any elevations in those health outcomes in Hoosick and Newburgh? And that we are part of a 7-site study across the country that is looking now at those health outcomes in a 5-year program. And so we'll be adding to the database on health effects of PFAS compounds by detailed study of exposed populations in New York State. Next slide, please. And, I'm skipping over a lot of information. I want to make sure we leave time for Norlite specific information, but just to present, the level of involvement that DOH has with PFAS, not only in biomonitoring, exposure pathways, but also looking for health effects in exposed communities. So we've been looking at biomonitoring and have some perspective on it I'd just like to share on my last slide, and that is that it determines if when you find PFAS compounds in someone's blood, it indicates that there has been exposure, but it doesn't say what the exposure source is. And we know that PFAS can come from a wide variety of consumer products. Even though it's been phased out of many things, there are still many consumer products that are in our homes that could be still an ongoing source and lead to exposures from indoor air. There can still be trace levels of PFAS in drinking water, and that's why we set the new MCLs so we can look for PFAS compounds in drinking water across public supplies across New York State. We know that PFAS does tend to concentrate in fish and certain other foods, and so when you find it in someone's blood, again, it doesn't mean it's coming from a particular source. It could be coming from a wide range of environmental media. And so we find that biomonitoring is most useful to evaluate trends over time and to assess the impacts of a particular intervention or mitigation of those sources, and that it's most likely to produce meaningful results where there's a clear exposure source, which differs across population groups or differs over time. And that's why we think it's really useful to look for, the PFAS compounds now in a detailed environmental sampling program around Norlite, as has been, developed and will kick off now in the coming days and weeks, so that we can evaluate whether the 2 years of HFLF combustion at Norlite has led to any increase in the environment that we can see, and we can evaluate next steps once we get those data. So that's all I have for right now, Sean, but happy to address any questions.
Great. Thank you, Gary. That was a very informative walkthrough, and I do see a number of questions coming in. Folks, if you could, just so all the panelists can see the questions that come in, if you could direct all your questions in the chat feature to all panelists. That way we can make sure we see them all. We are keeping a track and an account of them. To just tick off a few, Mark, with regard to enforcement actions, we've levied fines and penalties against the facility in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. We are going to be posting on our website a comprehensive accounting of our enforcement history against this facility overall. And Joe, some of your questions with regard to the science that we use and sort of the human health concerns. I think as Gary walked through, our science-based approach that we take to really make sure that residents are protected and not at risk. And then anytime we do hear complaints and issues, as you'll see throughout the evening, we do act immediately to get those addressed. And that is part of our commitment and priority to you and the community members to make sure that this facility is not posing a risk. Gary, I know you touched on biotesting a little bit, but there were a few questions that did come in more about that, and I was wondering if you could just go more into a little bit the specificity of the testing that we did in Hoosick Falls, and again, why we started out doing that, and again, the stepwise approach that we're taking here at Norlite, if you could.
Right. The biomonitoring at Hoosick Falls had a very pointed purpose, and that was we knew that the concentrations in the public water supply were elevated, and we, individuals in that community wouldn't necessarily know just how much exposure they had, and so it was really a program where concerned residents could sign up and be tested and to know what their personal exposures were. And the idea was that once the water supply was mitigated, then we could look and see if that would start lowering the blood levels. So to have a round 2 test around in 2018, that would then show that the mitigation was successful in reducing the exposures. Because if that wasn't successful, well, then there might be other exposure pathways that we should take a closer look at, or occupational, issues to address. And so, it had a very pointed purpose.
Thank you, Gary. That was very helpful. A number of the questions that have come in about with regard to EJ, environmental justice, and what is an environmental justice area, and some of the permitting questions will be handled a little bit later on this evening as well. So stay tuned for some of those, and we'll get to those. I will say as well, we will be keeping a compilation of all the questions that we receive, and any ones that we're not able to answer during the presentation tonight. We will be posting answers and responses to those that will be posted on our website in an FAQ section of our Norlite page. And we want to make sure that the information and questions that folks have are addressed and answered appropriately. So we'll make sure that future correspondence goes out with links of where you can find that overall. Looking at a couple other questions that have come in here, Gary, I think some of these, again, will be addressed later on this evening. Again, questions with regard to the legislation. Again, we're not speaking specifically about the bill tonight or the review that's underway, but really, again, talking about the scientific approach that New York State is taking to make sure that we are comprehensively addressing the PFAS issue, and especially air emissions associated with it. I think as you heard from Gary tonight, as you'll hear from other of our experts, New York has really been leading into the forefront of this issue overall, driving science and our analytical abilities to actually test for these compounds in the environment. Again, as Gary pointed out, the exposure pathways that we're primarily most concerned about really do focus on water and ingestion, and we're starting to drive the science now on analyzing air emissions. And again, with the concerns that the Cohoes community had raised and that our experts have raised as well, we want to make sure that the science is there and we know exactly what happens when these things are emitted to the air. So the next presentation that we're going to go into now is about our comprehensive sampling initiative. Regina, if you could go to the next slide. Again, just because I see some of the questions are centered around that, I want to introduce Dan Evans, who is our Director of the Bureau of Hazardous Waste and Radiation Management for DEC, and one of the leading experts who's designed this study that we have underway to really assess whether or not there was any release to the environment from the processing of firefighting foam at the Norlite facility. So Dan, why don't you walk us through here your presentation now, and I think this will help address some of the other questions that we've just got in.
Okay. Thanks, Sean. Happy to be a part of this team that's put together the sampling plan. It's a group here at DEC, plus some help from DOH, and I'll give a quick overview of, what our plan is and how we plan to move forward with it. If you can go to the next slide. Primary goal for this is to collect data that's going to help us determine whether the firing of the firefighting foam at Norlite resulted in emissions that that had environmental impacts and local impacts. So the first step along that way is to determine which areas would be most likely to receive emissions, and we had some of our folks who are experts in the air deposition and weather patterns indicated that the most likely areas would be immediately to the north of the kilns and also to the east. And so those are our areas that we were most interested in collecting samples from. On the image there on the screen, those are for soil samples. Those are areas that are depicted in green. And we also are collecting water samples. As previously mentioned, PFAS compounds do get in the water. And so we're sampling from the salt kill, which goes right through Norlite's property. We're going to collect some samples from the quarry pond, and also there's a small pond just to the south of Norlite's property, but still north of Route 7 there. So those are areas where we think we have the highest chance of finding impacts. We also want to get some samples from areas where we don't expect such high impacts so that we can see what the difference is. So in this picture, the yellow area is our upwind locations, and the blue areas, the light blue, I should say, are for water samples. The one up to the top of the screen is an upstream sample from the salt kill. And also we had another, I don't think it's named, a stream down to the south where we had an opportunity to sample from there for another sample location that was more outside of the immediate air deposition area. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is little quick details on the surface soil samples. We're taking 22 samples from 18 locations. So there's going to be some locations where we take more than one sample. Quality assurance, quality control, we're going to take some extra samples, some of them on site as duplicates, some of them blanks, some of them in the laboratory as blanks, to assess whether our laboratory techniques and our sample collection techniques are valid. The soils will be, every location will have a sample taken at the 0 to 6 inch depth, and this is the composite sample that's taken across that depth. Those will be used to compare all samples. There's going to be a select number of locations where we're going to take 0 to 2 inch samples, which would be indicate to us the soils that would be most likely to be exposure pathway. All samples are going to be analyzed for PFAS compounds using EPA method 537 modified. And also for the soil samples, we're going to be analyzing for metals to give us some extra data to give us some information on whether we see other impacts possibly from emissions from Norlite. We can go to the next page. Water samples, 25 samples in 15 locations. Once again, some of the locations are going to have more than one sample. And that's because the streams we're planning on doing high flow samples, and we're also going to take low flow event samples to get some idea of whether runoff has an impact on what we see. As I described earlier, some of the samples are from stationary surface water. And once again, these will all be analyzed for PFAS compounds, EPA method 537, which gives us a report on 21 different compounds in this category. One thing I did not put in the slides, but we will also be selecting a subset of these samples to be analyzed for top assay, which is a less specific to the compounds, but gives us an idea if there may be other PFAS compounds that are present. Not shown on the map, we're taking some additional water samples from Patroon Creek in Albany County to give us an idea of conditions in an urban creek that's more outside the areas that we would be really expecting to see impacts from Norlite, and also the Schuyler Creek in Saratoga County. Patroon Creek would give us some idea of an area of what the water conditions are in a location that has other businesses and industries along it, and then the Schuyler Creek would give us some extra data on an area where it's more rural and fewer other industries that might be contributing. We can go to the next one. This is a little zoom in on a residential area, Saratoga sites, that's adjacent to Norlite. The yellow dots give a general idea of sample locations for soils, and these are the locations where we're taking the additional 0 to 2 inch samples. This is an area of high use by people, and so this is the locations where we were really interested in finding out the 0 to 2 inch analysis. And just also on this map is a blue dot up towards the top that shows you one of the locations for the salt kill. The other ones are either within Norlite's property or upstream Norlite's property. Let's see, we'll go on to the next slide, please. So what's happening and what are the next steps? The sample team was in the field today. They were able to collect some of the samples that we're looking to collect. They're not done yet. However, over the next few weeks, we should hopefully be able to get all our samples that we're trying to get, both the low flow and the high flow. After that, we send them off to the lab for analysis. We should receive that data back after a short time, and we'll analyze to make sure it's valid. Once that step's complete, we're going to provide the property owners who have allowed us to come take samples from their property. We're going to give them their results, and we'll be preparing a summary report of the sampling. And from there, we will re-engage community, and we'll see, how the data looks. We'll compare it to, we'll use the data we've collected, but we'll also compare to other data sets that we have in various locations around the state to see how it compares and what we can conclude from this event. And
thank you, Dan.
I think I'm ready for some questions if we have any.
Yeah, we've got a number coming in. I think a lot of them you've addressed. And again, overall, this is, step one in our analysis of airborne deposition to determine whether or not something was released from the stacks. Obviously, absent a stack test of the emissions and what comes out of the stacks when they're processing firefighting foam, this is the way our scientific experts have devised a study to really determine whether or not something was released from the Norlite stacks. And obviously, since we've shut the door to firefighting foam and have no intention of allowing them to burn perfluorinated compounds, to really get this study underway, this is why we've designed it in the way that we've done. I know there were a number of questions about, reference streams, and I think you walked through that all right. And I think you talked about the different PFAS compounds that would be tested for. But, Dan, could you go into a little bit, I know you mentioned the different types of metals and other legacy contaminants that we're looking for. So obviously we're taking a look not just at PFAS, but other contaminants that may have been admitted as well. Can you go into a little bit more detail and I think provide a little more specificity to why we're taking that look in the way that we are?
Yeah, we wanted to get we were doing some field work, and we had some opportunity to collect some data. The team that's been working on this felt that beyond the PFAS analysis, that metals would give us the best chance at, determining whether there were impacts from Norlite. The sampling, the environmental sampling tells us what's in the environment. A lot of the compounds that we're concerned with here are subject to the stack testing and the actual emission point testing. And so this is really just a truth finding to see if that stack testing, see if we can determine whether that stack testing, has predicted that accurately. So we felt that metals would give us the best chance at making that determination.
Great, thanks, Dan. I'm just going through some of the questions that we've got coming in as well. Again, some of these will be addressed in later presentations. I think you did do a good job of walking through, again, why we picked the locations that we did. Again, DEC's experts has a lot of expertise in determining air emissions, and I know there were some points about the previous Bennington College study that was done, and when our experts really dove in on that and looked at the sampling reports that were there, we couldn't support, or the data that was presented couldn't really support the conclusions that they drew, and what we wanted to do was design an appropriate study, again, taking our knowledge of air emissions in the capital region and really doing an accurate study looking at upwind and downwind and around the facility. And again, what we know from other areas in which we've started to have to, unfortunately, do these aerial deposition studies for PFAS, like in areas of Hoosick Falls, we know generally how the precipitation rates or where the contaminants fall out of the air. And that's why, again, we wanted to start with this snapshot, see the data that we get, and that will guide our future actions on the ground, as Dan pointed out. Again, there are some other questions that I think based on what Gary had asked about before. I know, Joe, I see your questions about soot. I think we will get into a little bit more about, your permitting and regulatory authorities over that. And again, providing phone numbers later where folks can report complaints and things like that we can obviously investigate and take into account, and it is something we're going to do. And our next presentations will really go into the comprehensive performance test that will be underway coming up soon, and that will be our next presentation as well. And again, I think, Dan, you did do a good job of, again, talking about the comparative analysis and how we changed the study based on the comments that we had received from some of the folks in the area as well. And again, we'll go through all these questions. We'll hit as many of them as we can, and we will be posing answers to them subsequent to this meeting if we don't have time to get to them all tonight as well. Based on a date, Dan, I know you touched on this, some of it's going to be based on when we collect samples and when we're able to get all the data back. But as soon as we have a report put together, we'll be putting it out to the public, correct?
That is correct, yes. Yep.
Great. And apparently some folks are having some problems with the question and answer function here. We're making sure that everyone can see the questions that are coming in and that everyone is able to see what's being asked. And obviously, like I said, we're going to work to make sure that all these questions get answered either tonight or later on in the FAQ documents that we're putting together. So based on some of the emissions questions that are coming out and sort of our regulatory ability, and Dan, I think you mentioned stack testing overall, the next presentation here, and Regina, if you could go to the next slide, is about the comprehensive performance test that's coming away with regard to the upgraded pollution control equipment that, again, through our actions, we've required this facility to put on their operations. So happy to be joined tonight by Ben Potter, who's our Regional Air Pollution Control Engineer for DEC's Region 4. So Ben, why don't you take it away, and I think this will help address some of the questions that we have coming in overall.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Sean. I just want to get a mic check before I begin.
Good.
Good. All right, we'll move on to the first slide. As Sean has already mentioned, Norlite has recently upgraded their air pollution control system, and by upgrade, that's completely replaced the existing one. Norlite also burns hazardous waste in both of their kilns, which is the reason we need the comprehensive performance test on the new system to analyze the emissions and the operating parameters of that system. This performance test will validate the efficiency of that air pollution control system and all the components of it. Next slide. Comprehensive performance test is required by the US EPA. It is based on the maximum achievable control technology, and we will look at emissions, parameters and everything to do with that system during this performance test. The next slide. The new pollution control systems at Norlite are identical, meaning each kiln has its own pollution control system. And this slide gives a step-by-step process of the air pollution control system. And I'll go through each of these and explain what they do. When the emissions leave the kilns, after being combusted in the combustion chamber, they will go into a cyclone, and you'll have particulate removed. They'll go into a gas conditioning tower, which will reduce temperatures and treat for dioxins and furans. It will then go to a gas suspension absorber, where further pollutants are pulled from the emission stream, and then finally to a bag house, which will remove all particulate and metals and any of the other pollutants that are trapped in the media and in the bag house. This is all pulled through with induced fans at the end. So it's all being pulled through the kilns to the exhaust point, which is the exhaust stacks. Next slide. The CPT the performance test is going to take place in a couple weeks on November 10th. The original protocol for the test was submitted in February of 2020. DEC has had a team in the Division of Air working on that protocol. And we have gone through several revisions, making sure everything that's required by the federal regulations are in there and everything that we need as the state to show and support that the system is working right got into that. So it took several months to get that test plan correct, and it was finally approved in September of 2020. The testing will take place for about 3 days, and that final report with the results should be submitted to the department within 90 days of the testing completion. So after the test results are submitted, they have 91 days to postmark that, and then it should be coming to the department. Next slide. During the test, Norlite will be burning hazardous waste, and that will consist of organic substances and mixtures that can immediately be used as fuel, meaning they have a BTU value. At other times, Norlite can burn used oil. They can use spec used oil, or they can use off-spec used oil. And the spec oil will not contain chemical waste. It can contain contaminants that are allowed under New York State regulations and that we watch. We see all the analysis of the spec oil and off-spec oil, and they can also use natural gas. So if they're operating, for instance now, they're not always burning hazardous waste. And during this test, there will be no PFAS, there will be no AFFF that is going to be sent to the kilns and sent to the combustion chamber. Next slide. During the test, we test for several emission parameters that are defined in the federal regulations. This is a list of those emissions that we are testing for during the CPT. Dioxins and furans, mercury, semi-volatile, low volatile metals, hydrogen chloride and chlorine, particulate matter, carbon monoxide and oxygen, total hydrocarbon, and destruction removal efficiency. All of these have emission rates, emission set points set on them, or limits set on them from EPA, and we make sure during the test that all of those limits are met. You can go to the next slide. The last item in the previous slide was destruction removal efficiency. That's the topic of concern for most people right now. The way that destruction removal efficiency is determined is by choosing a principal organic hazardous constituent. The way we've chose this is by determining what is the most difficult chemical that Norlite burns that is to destroy. What's the most difficult thing to destroy? So we have charts from EPA that allow us to choose based on the greatest degree of difficulty in incineration of those principal organic hazardous constituents. These are specified in a table based on thermal stability of the chemicals. So we've chosen a POC that is representative of what Norlite burns on the worst case. And so by destruction removal efficiency, we look for 99.99% removal of that POC, or of that principal organic hazardous constituent. And that will show with a 99.99% removal that the kilns are operating at a temperature sufficient to destroy the chemical bonds of that pollutant that we're looking at, and sufficient to destroy chemical bonds of pollutants that are less thermally stable than what we chose to use as the primary organic hazardous constituent. Next slide. During the CPT, it's not just the emission standards that we're looking for. We're also looking at the way the system operates. There are several things that go into account, and there's going to be several DEC employees at the test that will witness and be watching the operating parameters as the test is taking place. Some of these are the hazardous waste constituent feed rates, meaning how much mercury is going to the kiln, how much semi-volatile metals, how much dioxin furans are being put in, how much chlorine. So those are all things we can watch. Combustion chamber temperature is another thing we can see real time. Every second that you are looking at that kiln burning or that data acquisition system, you can see temperatures all over that air pollution control system. Those temperatures all represent proper operation of the system and ensure that the emission standards are being met. So during the test, we will be looking at all of those operation parameters on their system in real time, and then that will all be submitted afterwards in the reports of the test. As I said, there's locational temperatures over the different parts of the system that I went over earlier. Those are each monitored, and we calibrate the devices that monitor the temperatures. We make sure everything is done. DEC makes sure all of those are calibrated and where they should be. And another thing we'll look at is the particulate control device operating parameters. That means the bag house. We can make sure the bag house is functioning correctly when Norlite is doing their operations. We can see exactly how it's working as we're looking at the data acquisition system. The other things we look at during this test is the feed rates, as I said, and all the kiln parameters, like how well and how efficiently is the combustion taking place in the kiln. In the next slide. All these tests and all these parameters are also monitored by a third party. That will be CK Environmental for this test. That is the party that submitted the protocol. They'll be overseeing the test, and we will be witnessing them do this test. DEC will be witnessing them do this test. We should have 4 people, including myself, that will be on site during this test. And once we receive a notice of compliance from this test, meaning that all emission standards were met and that we can determine all the operating parameters, those operating parameters that I just discussed will be set as regulatory limits. They won't be in the permit immediately, but on the notice of compliance, those are an enforceable parameter that we can go look at to make sure they are operating correctly. As I said earlier, the emission testing will take place over 3 days. Norlite should be burning for approximately 15 hours per day during the tests. Each test will be for a different one of the parameters I discussed. And that final notice of compliance is due within 90 days to the department. And as I said, all those parameters that are established during the CPT, they are enforceable immediately upon receipt of that notice of compliance. Next slide. During the test, we look at several things to make sure the system is operating correctly. One of those things that's important is the waste analysis plan. This is something Norlite has to keep that tells us exactly what is being burnt at all times. Any minute we can tell what is being received by the kilns and being burnt by this waste analysis plant and what tank it is coming from. Another safety feature that we have during the test and always is an automatic waste feed cutoff. If any one of those parameters that I was discussing earlier one of them is exceeded or something is below or it's out of spec, an automatic waste feed cutoff will automatically happen. So hazardous waste is stopped being fed to the burner, and the flame will be maintained by either the spec oil, off-spec oil, or natural gas. And until those parameters come back up, they're not allowed to burn hazardous waste in the unit until the parameters have had a time to stabilize and reach compliance with those limits and those set points that we have. The other safety measure with this type of stack testing is that they have to stack test these systems at least every 61 months. It can be sooner based on a change in the way they process, or if they change something in the system, they change a component out, that could require a test sooner. But at a minimum, it should be every 61 months that we see one of these comprehensive performance tests. There are others in between where we calibrate, but as far as the big test, that's how often it has to be done. And I think that's all I have for slides on this section.
Thank you very much, Ben. I think that was a very informative presentation. A couple of procedural notes here based on some of the questions coming in. Ben, I've got a couple that I think you can help answer. Going a little more in depth, but I think first and foremost, folks, tonight is an information session, and what we wanted to do in the way that we've designed this, obviously we would have preferred to do this in person and allow for a lot more one-on-one interaction, but we are in the middle of the COVID pandemic still, and we had to opt for this virtual platform for now. And again, based on the questions that we know have been out there and coming in, we wanted to create a good forum to provide some common information that really addresses a lot of those questions that we're seeing and really give you an opportunity to hear directly from our experts on the key things that we are undertaking. So this isn't a public hearing, and obviously with regard to the permit proceedings that are coming up, there will be other opportunities for a more hearing-like advancement or hearing-like opportunity to address this. But really tonight it's the start of a conversation with you all, and really, again, based on the questions that we see come in, provide this common information that the community can hear and better understand what we're doing. And I think to some of the points really help rebuild the trust. And I think we do recognize that there is a trust issue between the state and this facility. And we want to really unpack that and show you exactly all the expertise and passion that we are bringing to making sure that we are properly overseeing this facility, because that is our goal on behalf of you, working on behalf of all of you. We want to make sure that this facility is in compliance with the science-based regulations and laws that are in place. And obviously, if they are not, we are taking aggressive actions. And that's why we took the actions that we did, as the commissioner started us out on this evening with regard to firefighting foam and PFAS incineration. It's why we've stopped that. It's why we are not stack testing those emissions right now, because we don't want to see it burned right now. And as Dan Evans pointed out, we're undertaking a comprehensive scientific study to really understand whether or not anything was emitted from the stacks, and that's going to continue to drive our actions moving forward. So, we hope this session tonight is really going to help build your confidence in what DEC and the state of New York is doing with regard to oversight of this facility. So, Ben, one of the questions that came in, and I'm just going to find it here again, was specific to, I think you talked about the temperatures and whatnot that were going to be operating under and what we were going to be testing for. But one question, who is responsible for the controls of OPL during incineration? And can you go into that a little bit?
Well, the operational parameter limits are set by the Title V permit. In this case, once the CPT is done, those OPLs will be set by compliant results of this test. So what happens is those limits are set into the data acquisition system that Norlite uses. And there's several, if we're talking about temperatures, which are just one of the measures, there's thermocouples all over the system that report back to that data acquisition in real time. So there's a computer system that someone sits in front of, an operator, and if one of those is violated, within a second they know there's an alarm and it shuts down the system with that automatic waste fuel cutoff that I was talking about. So Norlite's responsible for monitoring those. We check them.
Great. And I think you just addressed this, but what do we have in place to prevent exceeding the OPL for maximum gas exit temperatures, and who manages for that?
Yep, that's exactly. We have the thermocouples on the gas absorption scrubber. We have them on the gas conditioning tower. We have them at the beginning of the bag house. So there's temperatures taking everywhere. And in that data acquisition system they have, that keeps a log of all those. So when we go and inspect, we can tell if there's any deviations from that temperature. So they average the times, and we can see it when we go inspect.
Great. Looking at some of these others, I think you covered a lot of them. With regard to some of the questions around the federal government and sort of the Clean Air Act, maximum, achievable control technologies for PFAS. Well, it is unfortunate that, the federal government hasn't acted, in any period of time really to regulate these compounds, and states like New York have had to really step in and drive the science on being able to test for these compounds in the environment and lead response actions. And obviously without federal action to address these compounds, we're really left on our own here, and that's what we're, I think, trying to convey to you tonight is obviously through the comprehensive performance test that Ben spoke about, we're making sure that they are in compliance with the Clean Air Act requirements. But then when it comes to perfluorinated compounds and firefighting foam in general, it's really up to us to drive the science on that, and that's exactly what we're doing here. And again, it's why we've told this facility to stop burning it and put them on notice that with regard to any other emerging contaminants or PFAS-related chemicals, that they will not be able to process those without coming in for a permit modification moving forward. And again, that gives the state more control over this facility in the future. It closes some of the gaps that we uncovered, again, as I started out talking about the differences between hazardous wastes and hazardous substances in the regulatory world that exists for these compounds, and making sure that we are exerting the utmost control that we can as a state to ensure residents are protected. I think, Ben, you did a good job of addressing most of the questions that I see came in specifically to the CPT. And again, we'll be around here tonight to answer more of those directly as they come in as well. But Regina, if we could go to the next slide, because staying on the topic of air, Mr. Potter is going to continue on with regard to the Title V permit renewal application and process overall. And again, the Title V permit is a Clean Air Act permit, and I'll let Ben speak about that and where we're going with regard to this renewal process underway.
All right, thanks. Can we move to the first slide? All right, for the renewal application, we received that renewal application on July 1st of this year. And the Division of Air started reviewing that pretty much immediately. Now, part of this renewal application is going to be dependent on the CPT results from the test that's coming up. The Division of Air wants to include those operational parameter limits that are going to be set by this CPT in the next permit that will be issued for Norlite. During this permit review, we have a team of people in the Division of Air, including myself, and a few people in central office that will be reviewing this application. And during that review, we're going to look at all federal and state regulations and determine if there's any ones applicable that we haven't found. We're going to look at everything. And during that period, as I said earlier, Norlite will be using those parameters that they determined during the CPT, and we'll hold them to that during inspections and looking at what they're doing. Move to the next slide. So part of this application, that team that we have working on this permit, we visit Norlite continuously. We have a monitor there also. We are at the site quite a bit. And what we're doing while we're there is we are looking at all the emission points, all the emission sources, every potential and all the fugitive sources, all the potential sources of air pollution that can come from Norlite and reach off site. So we're going to evaluate all of those sources as if they're new and look at them to see how we would permit them now, to see if there's any difference in what we have been doing to make it better if we can. We have that on-site employee that reaches out to this team that's doing the permit review. He reaches out consistently telling us what's going on there and any issues we can work on. So we're going to continue to use him to figure out things we can work at making these permits better or making the Title V permit better. Part of the evaluation, we have biannual full compliance evaluations, meaning we go through every condition in the permit, ensuring compliance with that. We respond to all operational complaints that we receive. When I get complaints in the region, I have someone out there generally within the hour. And now we have complaints that can come in through the spill hotline, and on off hours we have other staff that can be there 24/7 responding to complaints. Those complaints, if they're air driven, are given back to the Division of Air in the region, and we will follow up to make sure or ensure what it was, what the complaint was all about, and if it was indeed Norlite that was doing it. During that time that we're reviewing this application, Norlite will continue to submit several records. There will be a continuous review of those records, and there will be continuous review of the monitoring requirements during that time by both our on-site monitor and by the team that is permitting Norlite visiting the site, which we do regularly. And before the permit is released, the Division of Air will have a full review of that permit to ensure that all the conditions that could be in there are in there, and that everything was written right and legal. And also at the end, once we do issue a draft permit, the public has its 30-day comment period where you can make comments on the permit. We receive those comments, and then we'll take those into account and continue to make the permit and improve the permit better. Next slide. During this regulatory review, we are looking at the federal regulations. We will look at every federal regulations for applicability to Norlite. The federal regulations that apply here are the National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants that deals with toxic emissions, and also New Source Performance Standards, and that would be the operation of the mineral processing at the plant, meaning the conveyors, the aggregate piles, the crusher, all those processing points for the mine. So that is covered under federal regulation, and we'll be reviewing that. And along with that, there's several New York State regulations. One of the biggest ones right now we are looking into is our toxics reg, which is New York State Reg 212. This will require the toxic impact analysis for all the NESHAP sources that emit high toxic air contaminants. So a complete review of the CPT results will show us all the toxics and what we may need to do if there is additional control necessary. We'll be able to tell from this. And we'll also be able to tell everything that could be done in the future for as far as progressive technologies in treatment of the pollution. The other thing that New York State regulations look at is the fuel composition and use of the other fuels at the facility, meaning the on-spec and off-spec waste oil and the natural gas. We also will look at that. One of the questions I see coming in deals a lot with soot and everything. The fugitive dust control plan is another part of the permit that we're looking at and will be analyzing and making it better. There's the fugitive dust control plan mainly deals with the aggregate piles, the conveyors, and any of the dust that could be leaving the site. So we'll reassess that, find any improvements, and make that better if we can. Along with that fugitive dust control, there are several best management practices at the facility we will be looking into, and we'll find if we can have any improvements and where we can make improvements in those. And next slide. The national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants is the main concern of everyone probably on this line right now. What the NESHAPs deal with is the hazardous waste combustion and the emissions that come from the incineration of hazardous waste. The other things we look at dealing with toxics there would be equipment leak regulations, the storage regulations, and any other applicable ones we find. The storage and leak regulations, we ensure that what is feeding the kilns doesn't have leaks that would cause odors, that would cause a release of anything that would be toxic to the environment or to the public around Norlite. And next slide. That's it for my presentation. I'm free for any questions.
Thanks, Ben. Got a couple coming in here that I think you might be able to go a little more in depth on. Can you just talk a little bit more about the when our site visits, like how often do they occur, sort of what is the basis, and what are we looking for again when we're performing those site inspections?
Well, there's definitely a difference between site inspections and site visits. I often go to the plant to monitor what the new system is doing, how it's operating. So there's sometimes I'll just go there to see the data acquisition system. What's going on in the plant? How's it operating? Are they having problems? Trying to assess how everything's. I'm talking about the new plant with the brand new air pollution control system and visiting it during that. So inspections are different. We go there looking for regulatory compliance. It could be of the full permit, or there are times where we go look at a certain aspect of the permit and determine compliance with that, such as the bag house. We'll look at all the records that would be associated with that bag house, make sure they're doing that correctly. So over the course of the last year, myself, I've been there probably close to 10 times. And as needed, and that doesn't count complaints. So as needed, I visit the site often, and so does our other staff from central office.
Great. And sort of when complaints come in, and I know you mentioned complaints that there was a response within an hour. Can you just walk through just generally what our response is to those complaints and so how we address them as they come in?
Yeah, sure. So the most often people will complain and they're not complaining to the right place. So if the complaint doesn't get to me in the region, then it's hard to reach out and get there quickly. So it's best if your complaints are given appropriately. Right now we have a website coming up for complaints. You can also call the spill hotline. So during the daytime hours when my staff is working, if a complaint comes in, it usually comes directly to me or somebody that's in the office. And usually there's a location assigned to that complaint or someone wherever they're complaining from. We end up going there. We'll assess if there's an odor, what that odor is, or if there's a dust cloud coming from somewhere. We'll get on site. We'll look at that. The spills hotline, if you're calling that for an off-hour complaint, that goes through dispatch, through a police dispatch, and then it makes it out to the spill. So there's a little bit of a lag, but they're still there. They can be there pretty quickly. And they'll do the same thing. And they'll report back to myself and the region on what they found, and then we'll follow up with any necessary investigation the following day during normal business hours.
Thanks, Ben. And there are a couple questions just about, obviously, some skepticism about how this facility operates overall, and the notion of them trying to hide things from us, or maybe them burning AFFF without us knowing. Can you go into a little bit? And I know some of our next presenters will talk about with regard to the hazardous waste regulations what we have, but can you give some assurances to folks here tonight just about how we will be sure that they aren't going to sneak anything by us in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of our job. When we go to the facility, the main way we can tell what they're burning would be the waste analysis plan. So what that does is at any time I can go there and I can request that second, what are you burning? Show me the waste analysis plan. Show me all the contents of the tank that is being fed to the kiln. It's not a process that they can just shut off or change. They have to assess everything that has gone into that tank, and they have a real-time printout that they have to hand to me and show me what's going to the burner. So at this point, we've already told them to stop burning AFFF and anything PFAS. So they would have to report that. So we can check their hazardous waste manifests coming in. We can check the vehicles that bring them their hazardous waste to be burnt. We can look at the contents of every shipment going in to Norlite, and we have done that. That's how we found the list that was released of AFFF and PFAS, because they have to keep those things and they have to give them to us when we ask.
And actually some questions just about EPA overall. Ben, can you just go into a little bit about, sort of the differences between EPA and DEC with regard to oversight and, the more stringent work that we do as compared to EPA a little bit?
Yeah, sure. The state reg that I was talking about earlier, that would be 6 NYCRR Part 212, the toxics reg. That was just rewritten so that we can, anything that has a persistent bioaccumulative trigger, meaning it's very toxic and it will bioaccumulate, we can require more control than what EPA does in the NESHAPs. I think also on the line of this question, DEC has more of a facility presence than EPA does. EPA does not make it up to the facility, never has on the same consistent basis that DEC does.
Thanks. So I think that covers a number of the general questions that we've received so far, with regard to your presentation. And again, I think some of the other ones that we're getting in really talk about the hazardous waste that they're processing and what they're taking in and sort of our oversight over that. So, Regina, if you could go to the next slide. I want to get into a little more in depth now on the hazardous waste management permit, and that's up for renewal. And I'm happy to have Dan come back up and go a little more in depth on our oversight with regard to the hazardous wastes that they are processing at this facility.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Sean. So hazardous waste management permit, as it's been discussed, is currently getting near its permit end date. We have the application for renewal in front of us, and you can go to the next slide. The hazardous waste management in New York State is regulated under Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA. So we usually call these RCRA permits, a lot easier to say than hazardous waste management permits. And in general, what a RCRA permit does is it allows a facility to treat, store, or dispose hazardous waste within certain parameters. Similar to the air permit, we have expiration date at the end of the year, and the renewal application was submitted in July, and we've issued a notice of incomplete application, which noted some things that were not included in their applications that we'd like them to finish and send to us before we make that determination. Go to the next slide. So really quickly, what does the RCRA permit allow? It allows the facility to receive and store hazardous waste and some solid waste streams, approximately 15,000 gallons in containers. Containers could be in the form of drums or totes or any containers, anything that is portable, something that can be brought in by a truck and offloaded. And then they also have permanent tanks on site, which they store waste in, and it's approximately 155,000 gallons in the various tanks they have across the facility. The RCRA permit also details some of the piping systems that deliver the waste to the kilns. Kiln operations can be conditioned by the RCRA permit and also by the air discharge permit, with obviously the emissions covered by the air permit. Let me go to the next slide. So what do they have to do to be allowed to do this? First of all, the regulations are fairly prescriptive on the standards that have to be met to receive and store and handle hazardous waste. They also have a number of plans that they have to submit to us to detail how they do business and how they're going to meet those standards. And some of them are listed below here. There's an operations plan, which would describe some of the facility's capacities and layouts, preventive measures, how they manage their containers, how they manage their tanks. It gets into some of their kiln operations, and also discusses other operational requirements such as manifests and annual reporting and other kinds of record keeping. They have a contingency plan, which details some of the procedures that are in place in case there's an incident or some sort of emergency and how they respond to that. Our regulations require that they have a personnel training plan. And as previously discussed, a waste analysis plan is a big part of the RCRA permit, and that's going to identify the procedures for classifying wastes, for describing the types of fuels, for the sampling procedures, laboratory test methods, and the waste evaluation frequencies, fuel blending, and record keeping. So these are some of the main components that get submitted, and those are, we currently have their renewal items under review at DEC. This review is being conducted in the central office. Next slide, please. Other components of the permit that are not quite as directly related to operations. There's provisions for corrective action, which is the way we describe if there's a release from hazardous constituents, there's a framework to direct them to take actions to remediate those releases. It also identifies areas where wastes are managed and any areas that we need to keep an eye on and see if there's any remediation required. We also require them to have a closure plan for when they cease operations, and they are required to put up financial assurance so that we have assurance that when that time comes that there's money available to do the closure. Go to the next slide. So as I said, their application is currently in-house and under review. It's our job to make sure that that their operations will meet standards, and we will need to place any permit conditions that are necessary to be protective. Those application items are available for the public to view at this time on Norlite's website. They maintain the documents there, and the public will have an opportunity to send us comments during the course of the permanent renewal process, and I think we're going to be hearing some more about that process following my talk. And we can go to the next slide. Okay, that was a real quick run through RCRA permitting. I don't know, what do we have for questions, Sean?
Got a couple coming in, but I think some for Ben from the prior presentation. And Ben, I know there's a big question here about continuous air monitoring and sort of the federal requirements or non-existent federal requirements for those. Can you go into a little bit of that for us?
Sure. There's continuous monitoring of operational parameters at the site, and there's also continuous monitoring of certain emissions from the site. Right now, what Norlite looks at continuously as far as emissions would be carbon monoxide and oxygen and opacity. I know part of that question was why oxygen is not a pollutant. Oxygen is an indicator of how well that combustion chamber is working, and if there is an appropriate amount of oxygen for recombination of pollutants as they break down from the thermal incineration. So we monitor oxygen for several reasons, just to make sure the system's operating correctly. Carbon monoxide is an indicator of improper combustion, so we're monitoring that as well, and that's continuous. The other standards for dioxins and furans, EPA does not require a SEMS, a continuous emission monitor, for dioxin and furans. We're following their rules, saying that we test for dioxin and furans during the CPT or other types of tests. And what we do for continuous monitoring to ensure that the dioxin and furan standards are met is we monitor the thermocouple, the temperature at the gas conditioning tower. So we make sure the temperature is low enough there that we don't have a reformation of dioxin and furans after the breakdown in the combustion chamber. So the temperature will destroy them, and then we make sure they're not reformed by monitoring the temperature at that gas conditioning tower on a continuous basis.
Great. A little wonky, but that's why we have wonks like you working for us, Mr. Potter, and we appreciate that. Dan, back to you a little bit. Based on some of what you presented, there was some questions again. I think just about differences between hazardous waste and hazardous substances and sort of the manifesting of those and what's required. Can you again just go into a little bit more detail just on those requirements, what we look at, how we oversee what's coming in and being processed by this facility? Again, just to reiterate some of what you said.
Sure. Just, in really generally, hazardous substances are substances, so it's not a waste yet. In my, the way I think about it is a hazardous substance is an item. It could be a chemical product that's, in a storage tank waiting to be used for, beneficial purpose. It could be, generally, that's the category that it goes with. It's a substance. It's going to be something that is useful to someone in some manner that has hazards that go with it. So if it's released, it could create a situation that that needs to be addressed. So the hazardous substances are more geared towards products. Hazardous wastes are discarded products. So, there could be a question of, overlap, and certainly in a lot of cases there are overlaps between the two lists. There's a list of hazardous substances, there's a list of hazardous wastes, and at the moment the PFOA, PFOS are appearing on the hazardous substance list, but they have not been deemed hazardous wastes at this time.
Yeah,
I don't know if that helped.
Again, important to point out, again, in New York, they're on the hazardous substances list, but federally, both under the prior administration and the current administration, they have not been regulated at all. So we've really, stepped in to fill that gap overall.
Yeah, and to get into your manifest question, the hazardous wastes have requirements that carry manifesting with waste codes that are very specific to the type of waste and what compounds are in it. So at the moment, the PFAS compounds do not have that requirement for the manifesting the same way that a hazardous waste would.
Great. And Dan, I know there are some other questions coming in. Again, just about, our monitor and what they, look at in particular, with regard to the manifests. And I think, just overall, I think we mentioned in the beginning, the commissioner really kicked us off, and how we're taking a real fresh look at this facility overall. And we are really looking into that monitor to make sure nothing was missed from our standpoint with regard to the AFFF processing, and making sure that all appropriate compliance monitoring and reporting was followed properly. And that investigation is ongoing, and we're really looking into it. But again, part of that, overall investigation was really what drove us to step in and put a stop to this practice at this facility. And again, this facility has transitioned over time, as the commissioner noted. It was an aggregate facility early on, and now it's become both an aggregate manufacturing facility and a hazardous waste incinerator. And I think as the commissioner really started us off on this evening, we're not satisfied that it's really had a fresh, holistic look. And that's why through the permits that both Ben and Dan have talked about, we are taking that really hard look at it. And again, giving the community a chance to have a say in that process overall. And that's really our goal. We are here every day working on your behalf. These are the experts, or just a few of the experts that you're hearing tonight, that are looking out for your best interest overall, and making sure that we as a state are taking the right actions to hold the facility accountable when they are not operating properly, but also really taking a holistic look about the facility's operations overall and whether it's in the community's best interest. And our next presenter here, and Regina, if you could go to the next slide, Nancy Baker, who's a regional permit administrator, will give us a little walkthrough overall of the permit renewal process and where we are. Both Ben and Dan talked about the specific permits that are up for renewal and what they are and what they mean, and Nancy's going to walk us through now just where we're going with the application process and how you can get involved and stay informed. So, Nancy, why don't you take us away?
Thank you, Sean. Can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Okay, great. As Sean said, I'm Nancy Baker. I'm the Regional Permit Administrator for DEC's Region 4. I know there's been a lot of technical information here, so I'm going to try and knock it down a notch and review the enhanced permit review process for Norlite's Air Title V and hazardous waste permits and how you can be part of that process going forward. Norlite facility has been in operation since 1956 and has been permitted and regulated by the department for many decades. The Haz Waste permit was first issued in the early 1900s after department review and completion of successful stack tests, and the Air Title V permit was first issued in the early 2000s in accordance with federal and state regulations. In addition to those permits, the facility is also subject to speedies, water withdrawal, and a mining operational permit. Regina, next slide. Beginning on January 1st of 2016 with the issuance of the new Air Title V permit, Norlite identified that the air pollution control system required updating. Throughout 2017 and 2018, Norlite conducted modeling, process evaluations, and pilot testing, which led to the decision to pursue Project Delta to upgrade their technology facility-wide. This project included replacing Norlite's wet scrubber air pollution control system with a semi-dry scrubber system and upgrades in related technology to accommodate the change. Switching to a semi-dry scrubber provides more efficiency to the air pollution control system and has also fully eliminated the wastewater discharge to the Mohawk River. In October of 2018, Norlite applied for permit modifications for Project Delta, which eventually resulted in the issuance of the 2019 modification to the Air Title V permit, along with other permits and approvals related to that project. Norlite then applied for renewal of both the Air Title V and hazardous waste permits on July 1st of 2020. It was determined by the department that full regulatory and technical review should occur and that the applications would be treated as new for the purpose of expanding public participation. This means that the applications require an extensive public outreach campaign to provide the community with the opportunity to comment on the pending applications, as well as the overall operations at the facility. Permit applications have been distributed to all technical staff throughout the department to begin their technical review. The department sent out a request for information on August 28th of 2020, in which we requested several different items from the applicant, including an enhanced public participation plan under the Commissioner Policy 29 on environmental justice, a human health and ecological risk assessment, information related to the Community Risk and Resiliency Act and Climate Act, and a request for any known upcoming requests they may have to modify the permits. Norlite has agreed to all of these deliverables, and the department will review these responses when they're received. If Norlite provides the requested items by December 31st, which is the expiration date of the current permits, then the pending Air Title V and Haz Waste permits will be sufficient for purposes of the State Administrative Procedures Act, otherwise known as SAPA. SAPA specifies that if the renewal applications are considered timely and sufficient, the permittee is allowed to continue to operate under the existing permit limits until the department makes a final decision on the renewal applications. While the Uniform Procedures Act, or UPA, sets timeframes for department review, it is more important to do a full comprehensive review of the project than to race to a decision by the time the permit expires. In this case, SAPA allows the department to take the time we need to do a complete review of the application in lieu of trying to issue the permits before expiration in December. Therefore, the department will have the time it needs to fully evaluate the pending applications and involve the public at every opportunity prior to making any final decisions. Next slide, Regina. The department is applying environmental justice requirements to both permit applications, and Norlite has agreed to conduct an enhanced public outreach process, which includes the preparation of a public participation plan. To answer a question from earlier this evening, the DEC's environmental justice policy applies to permitting decisions for facilities such as Norlite that are either in or near a designated EJ area. Portions of the City of Cohoes are designated EJ areas, which is why the department is requiring EJ procedures for these applications. Once the department receives and approves the public participation plan, public meetings will be set up to ensure that the public is fully informed of the project, including the status of our review and any available documents, and will be able to ask questions and receive detailed information regarding the renewal applications and facility operations. A lot of technical information was presented tonight, but these are opportunities to hear more and understand what is proposed and ask further questions. The meetings will be scheduled to keep the public informed as our review progresses, and we encourage active public participation. Notice of the meetings will be published in local newspapers and broadcast on media at least 30 days in advance, and will also be shared by DEC through its designated email listserv. Directions on how to be added to this listserv will be on the following slide. And in addition, all permit information will be publicly available through electronic and hard copy document repositories. Those repositories will be included within the final participation plan, which everybody's able to see. So if and when the department determines that the applications are complete for public review, a public comment period will be announced in the local newspaper, on the radio, and in the environmental notice bulletin. Stakeholders outlined in the public participation plan will receive a copy of this notice sent directly to them. The public can use this comment period to submit formal comments on the application to the department. Our technical review of the applications runs concurrently with the public participation outreach, so that ongoing comments that we receive from you can be evaluated along with the department's review. The final decisions on the permits will be responsive to public comments raised during the public participation process and the public comment period. In addition, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, will have a designated 45-day review period to accept, reject, or provide recommended changes to the Air Title V permit application. All comments will be evaluated along with the application record and will be responded to prior to any final decision being made. Next slide, Regina. As stated earlier, to be kept informed of the progress on the applications or submit comments, you can request to be on the department's mailing list by emailing comments.norlite2020@dec.ny.gov to be added to the list. You can also review public documents and keep up to date on the progress through the website noted on the screen. I would really encourage everybody to keep involved, stay informed, and participate in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Looking at some specific questions that have come in, with regard to SAPA extension, can you just go into a little bit about how that works? I think you touched on it a little bit, but what are the processes and procedures that the department follows with regard to that?
According to the State Administrative Procedures Act, the applicant has to submit a timely application. In the case of these, it has to be submitted 180 days prior to expiration, which is 6 months, which they did do. It needs to be sufficient for the department to commence their review. So we had requested a few additional items that I outlined earlier. If they submit those by the end of the year, then they are what's called SAPA protected. That provision is applicable to any permitting or approval agencies, not just DEC. That affords the applicant protections in case we don't issue their permit in time for it to expire. So if we don't issue it in time due to short staff or whatever the situation may be, they're protected to continue operating following the exact same permit that they have, the same limits with no changes. That, on the flip side, will allow the department more time to do a more in-depth review. If we had to rush to decision by December, obviously we wouldn't be able to do these types of meetings and get the input of the community that's concerned. So SAPA is helping the department in this case do a better review, a more thorough review.
Thanks, Nancy. I know there are some questions or comments with regard to environmental justice, and we do have a very great environmental justice program led by Rosa Mendez here in the state that, from New York's perspective is a little more robust, than EPA's approach overall, and we're continuing to make some important refinements to it. We didn't have any of our environmental justice experts on tonight, but based on some of the comments I've seen, we'll make sure that we provide some more opportunities for folks here to engage with our EJ program administrators and really go into detail about our overall environmental justice approach here in the state. So we wanted to leave this slide up for a while as we go into some more QAs this evening. And again, as I mentioned before early on, these are the ways that you can get in touch with any of our DEC experts in our regional office and here in our central office in Albany to answer any questions that you have from time to time. Again, we've created the general comments at Norlite 2020 box to really guide some of those questions with regard to the permit process and other general questions that folks have. I know Ben talked about the spill hotline, where to report complaints, and other numbers of experts that you can call, both at DEC and DOH as well. And again, our doors are always open here, and we're going to leave this slide up. This information was included in the Norlite community newsletter that we've recently put out, and it's on our website as well. If you didn't get an email or a hard copy of this, please do email the comments at Norlite 2020 email box because we want to make sure that you are added to our lists and can continue to receive a lot of the information that our program experts spoke about tonight. Now, I know there were some email questions that came in, one of which, again, centers around, I think everything that we talked about today between the differences of hazardous substances and hazardous wastes and what this facility was required to do on the hazardous waste side and with regard to hazardous substances, what the different sets of requirements are. And again, as we found out that the facility processed firefighting foam containing perfluorinated compounds, we immediately launched an investigation looking into our regulatory ability to oversee this practice and whether or not they were properly complying with those regulations and those laws in the state. And through the actions when we stepped in to tell them to stop burning, and through the other actions we spoke about tonight with regard to shutting the door from them processing any emerging contaminants or hazardous substances that aren't currently addressed in their permit, we recognized that we needed to take stronger action as a state. And that's consistently what we do across the board. Anytime something new comes our way that may not be covered by our laws or regulations in the state, we immediately jump into action, and that's exactly what we've done here in this situation. And again, why we wanted to structure tonight's presentation the way that we did, to really stepwise walk through what we bring to bear to make sure that a facility like this is being held accountable for its actions and is in compliance with all the stringent regulations that exist. And again, when the federal government hasn't stepped in to act in any way to regulate compounds like perfluorinated compounds, either in this administration or prior administrations, states like New York are really left to go at it on our own. And what you've seen consistently, and again, with regard to the PFAS action plan that we have on our website, you can see exactly how, again, we're leading the nation here on addressing this emerging issue and making sure that we're taking the actions that we need to take to keep New Yorkers like you protected and adequately overseeing facilities like Norlite. And again, through the permit review process that Nancy spoke about, if we are not satisfied that they are going to be in compliance and not able to achieve that compliance working directly with you through this comment period, we're taking that very hard look moving forward directly with you. And that's why we wanted to walk you through the two different permits now, how they're governed, how they're structured, and then the process for renewing those and the opportunities that we're providing you to stay engaged in that process moving forward. Regina, did we miss any other email questions that may have come in here while we've been chatting tonight?
Sean, so we've gotten a couple asking about the mining blasts, and when there's concerns, who should they be reaching out to about the strength of the blast while mining at the
Great.
Facility.
And I think Martin Brand had to leave the presentation tonight. Martin is our Deputy Commissioner for Materials Management and Remediation and oversees our mining efforts. But as you'll see here on the mineral resources, our staff person here can help address those questions for you. And we do have rigorous oversight as it pertains to the mining, the shale mining that occurs on site. There are very specific parameters and times in which they can blast as part of their mining operations. But Solom can walk you through that, and I encourage you to direct those questions to her. Again, we did hear, obviously that this was interest, but the majority of the interest seemed to be in the hazardous waste and air emission side of the operation, so we focused tonight's presentation on that. But in our future conversations, we'll definitely bring our mining experts in to address some of those points as well. But again, our staff are open and able to address any specific questions, comments, or concerns that you have. Nancy, is there anything that you would want to add from a mining oversight perspective at all that I may have missed?
I do know that the site is inspected annually. I don't know when the last inspection was, but Salm and her crew have a very stringent oversight of that facility. They do conduct blasting periodically, and they are able, if you do have a complaint with a blast, give Salm a call, because she will go out and put a seismograph on your property for the next blast, or she'll get the records and find out what happened and investigate that. They're really great about doing that every time.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. I know there's some questions about this presentation tonight, and this whole session has been recorded and will be posted on our Norlite website. As soon as that is up, we will make sure that folks are made aware of that. We'll provide probably an email blast just to continue to provide updates. And obviously, again, appreciate folks coming on tonight. And we know that this was a very in-depth presentation with a lot of different subjects. But what we wanted to do, again, I think as I've mentioned a lot, is really show how we're using science as our guide here when it comes to regulating a facility like Norlite. And we are bringing the best scientific expertise in the state and really in the country to bear on this facility. And again, you've heard from some of our experts tonight, and there's a host of others that work behind them and with them day in and day out on issues like this, that we are making sure that we're taking the right actions that we need to overall. Now, again, we kept this conversation virtual primarily, and we appreciate everyone emailing questions in. information and contributing questions in the chat function. This was in part really to help make sure that everyone could adequately hear and listen to our experts as they conveyed this information tonight. But we did want to provide those folks who called in and maybe just listening via the phone and not following along officially online on the WebEx a chance to ask any questions that they may have. So, Regina, if I could have you just open up those members of the public who are on a phone line and any of those that want to ask questions, we'd be happy to entertain those now at this time.
Okay, call-in users, you should be muted, or unmuted at this point.
And folks, if you're not asking a question, if you could *6 to mute your line and #6 to unmute your line, that will come back on some feedback and audio issues that we're getting right now. But if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free. Anyone on the phone like to ask a question?
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Bonnie. Can you hear me?
Yes, Bonnie, we can. We are getting a little echo and feedback.
Oh, okay. My name is Bonnie Goldsmith. I live in Delmar. Is this coming across okay?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, because I hear an echo. All right. At any rate, I wanted to know how Norlite was able to burn firefighting foam for 2 years without you being aware of it.
So thank you, Bonnie. And again, I can touch on that a number of times this evening. Again, firefighting foam, New York was the first state in the nation to regulate perfluorinated compounds as hazardous substances, which really unlocked our ability to use the Superfund program to effectuate response actions on the ground to guide environmental cleanups where they have to undertake. Because these compounds are federally unregulated and are not regulated as hazardous wastes currently, Norlite was able to process them because they are hazardous substances, and there are less stringent requirements than on the hazardous wastes oversight that we have that Dan spoke about earlier tonight. So as soon as we found out, though, that they were burning it, that's when we launched into our investigation to determine really what our legal and regulatory abilities was to oversee this and to make sure that they were in compliance with everything they needed to be in compliance with. And that's as that investigation unfolded, that's when we stepped in to tell them to stop burning that and stop accepting firefighting foam for processing. And now all the other actions that we've discussed tonight are really what we've done since then to, again, strengthen our oversight of this facility with regard to processing perfluorinated compounds. Again, we've put in place new measures to ensure that any emerging contaminants that they may take in the future that are not regulated as hazardous wastes aren't just allowed to be burned, and that they have to come to us first for a permit modification, which again will provide the community a chance to weigh in on any changes that they want to make with regard to what they're processing in that facility. So this is why we wanted to walk you through exactly how we've responded to this to really strengthen our oversight and, again, really lead the nation when it comes to protecting New Yorkers from these federally unregulated contaminants.
Can you hear me still?
Yep.
Okay, one more quick question, which is I think a lot of us are wondering why Governor Cuomo has not signed the bill that was put forth by Breslin. And are you advising him one way or the other whether to sign it or not?
Yeah, Bonnie, we, irrespective of that piece of legislation, what we wanted to do was walk you and all the participants here tonight through our comprehensive actions to effectively oversee this facility in regards to firefighting foam. And, we can't speak directly for the governor's review process as it pertains to how he looks at legislation like this. But again, what we wanted to do tonight was really talk about all the things we are doing and will continue to do. And as the commissioner really set us off on tonight, from the top down, we have shut the door to them processing firefighting foam here at this facility. We've put in place the more stringent oversight that we need over firefighting foam and emerging contaminants overall, and we're making sure that what has happened here doesn't happen again. And then with regard to determining what, if any, impacts may have occurred from their processing of firefighting foam, Dan Evans, who walked us through the comprehensive sampling plan that we have going on underway in the community right now to really look at, was there a release to the environment from any compounds that can be directly attributed to the processing of firefighting foam. And again, this is our first strong snapshot looking at what could have come out of the stacks and is really guiding our future actions on the ground with regard to this facility if we do find anything may have been released to the environment. So we hope that gives you a strong, sort of review and overview of just what we're doing irrespective of any bills that the legislature has passed.
How would you know if it's in the air if they have stopped burning it? Because when they're burning it, it's probably in the air, but they're no longer burning it.
Correct. That's why we're doing the investigation and have designed the investigation the way we did. And Dan, I don't know, do you want to speak a little bit more about that and just, how we're looking at aerial deposition here through your work?
Yeah, sure. The shallow sampling that we're doing, we're hoping that is able to capture any emissions that occurred during the 2018-2019 time period. We would expect, if there was a pattern of aerial deposition, that it would still be in the shallow soils, and so the soils are going to hold on to it for long enough to help us determine whether there was a problem or not.
Okay, and how I know you said they're not going to be allowed to burn firefighting foam anymore. Is that forever?
Yeah, the way that we've structured the action for right now, they would have to come in for a permit modification for us if they intended to do firefighting foam or any emerging contaminants or other PFAS products.
Okay.
And that would give the community a chance to weigh in on it as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Are there, I know some folks on the WebEx want to ask questions too, and we'll get to you in a second as well. There is a hand-raising feature here that folks can use, but first we wanted to start with those folks on the phone who aren't on the WebEx to ask any questions that they may not have been able to type into the chat function here. So do we have anyone else on the phone that would like to ask a question? And again, if you're muted on your phone, either press your mute button to unmute yourself, or you can press #6 to unmute. I heard some beeps with someone trying to ask a question. We'll leave the lines open here for a second, and obviously appreciate those questions from you, Bonnie, and thanks for weighing in and joining us tonight. As I said throughout, we are and have kept a compilation of all the questions that have come into the chat tonight, and also via email. We will be producing a frequently asked questions or a response to those questions that will be posted on our website as well. I think there was a lot of redundancies in some of the questions. Obviously, a number of them were addressed by our presenters, but we'll make sure we do a good compilation that really walks through the comments and questions that we've received tonight. And definitely continue to check our website for updates, and we'll obviously do the email list. And again, if you are not on our email list, the comments.norlite2020@dec.ny.gov is your opportunity to provide us your contact information to make sure you're on our lists and can be and make sure that you're receiving the information that we're putting out, both the stuff that we've discussed tonight, and then some of the other actions that will be coming underway very soon. So do we have any callers, again, that have not had a chance to ask a question that would like to ask something tonight?
I just have one more question. This is Bonnie. What is your name?
Oh, my name is Sean Mahar. I'm the Chief of Staff for DEC.
Okay, thank you so much. Good night.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, any other callers that have not asked a question? Regina, I'll pivot back to email. Do we get any more email questions that have come in that we should address?
No new email. Oh, let me just double check that one. No new emails.
Great. So, Regina, if you could, I know Mr. Ritchie has had a question that he wants to ask. He's asked a number tonight that I think we've addressed, but could you please unmute Mr. Ritchie's line and allow him to ask a question?
Yep, just give me one moment to find him on here. There he is. Yep. Right, you should be unmuted now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep. Joe, how are you?
Good, good. I just want to thank you guys for, having this. I really just want to ask a simple question. It doesn't go with, the technicalities of anything or even just, what the chemicals are, but I think we've reached a time, especially within the New York State's environmental goals, that a facility like Norlite should no longer be able to operate, especially next to a low-income public housing development. They've been emitting these emissions for 50 to 60 years. People who have lived here for 80-plus years have noticed that since they stopped burning consistently, but they still are burning right now, their houses and their cars have been the cleanest that they have ever seen it. And if this facility continues to run, the people of Saratoga sites, the people of Cohoes, Troy, Colony, and the surrounding areas do not have the human right of just clean, breathable air. And, you can say that you haven't found anything, I've lived there for 20 years. And every year, year after year, I have to go outside, I have to hold my breath to get the mail. People are coughing, people are developing these acute respiratory problems. It is just unacceptable, and we cannot allow this facility to run anymore. It's literally 500 feet, maybe even less, from where we live. I have never seen my house so clean since I've ever been alive, and I think that's a shame. I think we should all have access to clean, breathable air, and right now, the Cuomo administration is not allowing us to have that where we live.
Well,
we've been taken advantage of for 50 to 60 years, and the time to act is now. And
my question is awesome.
Why do you continue to allow a facility like this to run when people are raising their children, taking care of their elderly who have respiratory issues, end-stage respiratory issues, such as my grandmother? How does this facility help? What's the morale of this? It just doesn't make sense morally to let this facility to run, just face value. And if we want to be better than California, then we have to stop. That's what Cuomo wants. We have to stop these kinds of chemicals from being even allowed in the state. You can't even bring these chemicals. You can't even burn these chemicals in California. So if we want to tout our environmental goals and amazingness, then let's be better than California and burn and completely deny these facilities from ever operating again, and to not burn these types of chemicals in this area. Mind you, it's 400 plus chemicals. It's just unfathomable, and I do not want to live next to this facility ever again. I just don't. I don't want anybody else to be subject to this, and more people are, and they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, Joe, and that's why we hope that tonight's presentation gave you that solid walkthrough of exactly all the regulatory oversight that we bring to bear on this facility, all the federal standards and the strengths and weaknesses of those, and again, what the federal government has and has not done, quite frankly, over the past few administrations to regulate these unregulated contaminants, and how New York has stepped in. And again, we have shut the door in New York through our actions at Norlite to stop this facility from processing firefighting foam and PFAS compounds. And the permitting process that Nancy, Dan, and Ben walked you through is exactly how we're taking that fresh new look that the commissioner spoke about tonight. And, I think he opened it up quite frankly pretty well by saying, we're not satisfied with the look that this facility has gotten, and that's why he himself has been personally invested in really setting the tone and stage for us to take this comprehensive look with you and really make sure that the community has a chance to be heard in these processes that Nancy spoke about. And that is our commitment and goal to you, is to really make sure that we are working directly with you, that, from your standpoint, we are bringing the most stringent regulatory oversight of this facility to bear on your behalf, and that's exactly what we're doing. And with regard to these permits, we're really taking that holistic look with you, and that's why we encourage you to roll up your sleeves as you have and get involved and continue to work directly with us, especially during this permit renewal process, to make sure your voice is heard in that process. And we are taking a very strong and in-depth look at this facility because we have heard from you and others that it's time for that to happen, and that's exactly what we're doing. And again, that's why we structured tonight's presentation to really walk through on the hazardous waste permit and the air permit side of the equation exactly what we're doing to bring to bear on your behalf our oversight.
Yes, I appreciate it, but just even allowing the facility to continue to operate is against my rights as a human being. It just doesn't make sense anymore in a world that is transitioning into an environmental sustainable area and a state. It's very interesting, and I understand that the DEC is taking a hard look now, but they allowed Norlite to burn the stuff for 2 years illegally, and there was manifestations that DEC had signed, and I had sent a letter actually to you guys with a bunch of questions about a month ago through the offices of Assemblymember McDonald and Wrestler, and I haven't received a response to that yet.
Yeah, Joe, we're working on that response, and it just unfortunately wasn't through the review process yet, just to get that finalized before the presentation tonight. But again, it's why we structured our discussion tonight to, I think address a number of those points that were raised in that letter and that we've heard from other community members. And I hope tonight that it's come across exactly the, your assertion that something was illegal that happened, the complex regulatory world that we live and work in here at DEC with regard to hazardous wastes versus hazardous substances. Mr. Evans can obviously go in more depth on that if you like, but, that is something we looked at. Were they operating legally and in compliance with their permits? And, was what happened, allowable? And that's why we stepped in and told them to stop. And that's why we've taken the steps through our actions now to make sure that door is shut right now. And
they already burned 2 million pounds of it, it was never in the EPA. It was never in their EPA permit to allow this. And, I have people on here who would really like to speak to that, especially Judith Hank, who was the EPA regional advisor. It was illegal. This should never have happened. And the question is that why was it allowed? And then also the on-site monitor, when we had met in July, I was told that the DEC didn't know that this was happening for at least 1 year. So where is this gap of a year? They burned at least 1 million pounds in that 1 year. So what happened if there's an on-site monitor there every single day? And then that raises the next question of, we need to change the monitor. We need to keep recycling them in and out so they're not there for 15 years, like the one is now. It's just unacceptable.
Sure. Dan Evans, do you want to go into a little bit more, just again with the hazardous waste versus hazardous substance stuff, and sort of
I'm just aware of it, but I know for a fact that it was illegal to do. So there's people in the field who have worked on the EPA who have told me this is illegal. This should never have happened.
Well, Dan, can you just speak to that?
Sure. The waste analysis plan that's part of the RCRA permit sets the standards for how they blend fuels, and there's provisions in there for wastes that are not hazardous wastes, and that's where the AFFF fit in. That's my understanding. Our review of what they did did not find that it was illegal or contrary to their permit or the waste analysis plan.
Right.
So the
No,
good news right now is we
it.
have a new waste analysis plan in front of us, and we have opportunities to take a new look based on things we know now that we didn't know 5 years ago when the previous permit was issued, and we can do something about it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, but
and again, Joe,
it wasn't supposed to happen.
Well, again, Joe, but when you have a substance like perfluorinated compounds or PFAS that are federally unregulated in any way, states like ours have to step in and begin regulating them. And that's what we've walked you through tonight, is the steps that New York has taken to really unlock our powers and authorities to regulate these compounds. And the first thing we did was regulate them as hazardous substances to give us our authorities under Superfund to be able to go into places like Hoosick Falls and hold polluters accountable and begin addressing environmental contamination and effectuating cleanups. And again, these compounds have been around a while. This administration, previous administrations never regulated them, and it's really left it up to states like New York to step in and address them, and that's what we're doing. And Joe, not to cut you off, but I do know that there are some other folks who have hands raised here that we want to get to. But do you have any more questions that you want to ask?
Yeah, I just want one more question. It's more or less a request. Is the DEC, willing to publicly say right now that they're sorry for letting this happen for 2 years? We saw what happened in Hoosick Falls. Many people got cancer. Many people, the Department of Health let people drink contaminated water for 18 months. So I just want an apology from the Department of Environmental Conservation for this mistake to ever even happen, because I feel like we shouldn't even be here talking about this specific substance. Of course, we should be talking about, better regulation, but I just want an apology for the community for this ever happening under the DEC's watch.
Well, Joe, what you have is our ongoing commitment to the community to address issues like this and make sure that we're bringing to bear the appropriate oversight and actions to make sure that you're protected. And I hope what we've been able to show you tonight and help regain some of that trust in DEC's ability to properly regulate emerging contaminants like this and step in to address issues when a facility starts doing something like this, and know that we are bringing to bear the best scientific expertise that we have in the state, the best legal minds, the best permit folks, the best regulators that we have, to make sure that we're taking the steps that we need to keep your communities protected. And when something like this happens, you have our full commitment to step in and make sure that we, again, are comprehensive, scientifically analyzing what has happened, through the on-the-ground research that we're doing now, through the study that Dan spoke about, really starting to understand, did something come out of the stacks that presents an exposure pathway that needs to be addressed? Again, we prioritize looking at community health, the water supply look first, because that's step one from our standpoint. Again, as Gary Ginsberg talked about from DOH, we have to look at exposure pathways, and we know that water is one of the primary exposure pathways that people get exposed, similar to the Hoosick Falls example that you brought up. And again, with these being federally unregulated contaminants, where the federal government hasn't stepped in to protect us on a nationwide basis, we as a state have to step in and do that work ourselves. And that's exactly what we've done here. And again, that's why we first pivoted right away to doing that analysis of the Cohoes and Green Island water supplies, which were the two closest water supplies to this facility. And now once we know that those levels in those haven't changed over time and there wasn't an impact from that, that's given us the time that we need to actually design a comprehensive scientific study to really look at, did something come out of the stacks that needs to be addressed, and that will allow us to hold this facility accountable. And that is our commitment to you and the Cohoes community and the greater Capital Region overall, because we've heard you. We've heard you loud and clear. The commissioners heard you loud and clear, and you have that passion of his and ours really behind you now in holding this facility accountable and taking a fresh, really in-depth, comprehensive look. So I appreciate your comments tonight. I know there were another email question that came in, so we're going to take that, and then we'll get to some of the other hands that are raised here in a second. But
Thank you.
Hey, Sean, can I jump in for a second?
Oh, sure.
Just addressing the concerns down at Saratoga sites. I mean, separate and apart from the AFFF issue, and actually a month before we became aware of it back in January, I was concerned that there was an environmental justice issue there, you know, the low-income housing and the shadows in Norlite. So that's something that we met with Congressman Tonko to discuss back in January. COVID kind of got in the way. And then the AFFF issue, again, put the environmental justice issue under the spotlight. So I just wanted to assure Joe and the folks that are down there that that is not a back burner issue for us. That's an ongoing discussion we're having. The Cohoes Housing Authority appears to be very much on board. So, you know, we're working in that direction. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year or next, but it's something that the city and the Housing Authority is working on in conjunction with our congressional delegation. So I just didn't want to let that Joe's comments pass. I mean, there's other things going on besides the AFFF.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Appreciate the comment, and to your point as well. Dan walked through, you know, the oversampling that we're doing at the Saratoga sites, and that is really to give that ammunition to the Housing Authority and others for that look. And again, we're looking at PFAS, but we're not just looking at that as Dan outlined. We're looking at the heavy metals. We're looking at some of those legacy contaminants. That's going to give us a better picture to see whether or not there is an issue there that, you know, would lead us to believe that that housing complex needs to be moved and give HUD the ammunition that they need to take those actions. So that's why we designed the study in the way we have.
Right, and again, I appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So I see some more air questions for Ben here. So, Mr. Potter, let me just try and unpack this a little bit. So yeah, there are some questions about, you know, the repeat exceedances in the past, you know, 2012, 2014 range, and some of the pressure drops. With regard to the CPT and some of the other actions that we're undertaking now, can you just go into a little bit more on, again, how we're looking at that issue and how we would be overseeing it?
Sure. The 2012, 2014 pressure drops that you're talking about all took place on the system that is no longer there. That's their pollution control system that had a wet scrubber. So that was an EPA inspection done at that time. DEC was aware of that inspection. We were aware of their findings, and they were processing their findings separate from DEC. And I think those were recently released, and that's why you're asking. But that was on the old system.
Great, so, thanks. And Regina, did we get any other email questions in that I may have missed here?
No new ones.
Great. Let's go to some of the hands that are raised. I know Ms. Sank would like to ask a question, so why don't you take it away, Judith? And Regina, if you could unmute Judith's line, that would be great.
Hi, good evening.
Yep, you should be on.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Thank you very much for your time this evening. I want to go back to when the public first learned about the burning of 2 million pounds of AFFF. We learned about this from National Sierra Club and Earth Justice, who filed a federal lawsuit involving burning toxic firefighting foam at various hazardous waste incinerators around the country. And what was really odd about this is the way the Clean Air Act typically works is when a company is introducing a new waste stream to be burned at their facility, there has to be a stack test. So as you know, when International Paper wanted to burn tires up north, they did a stack test and found that they were not able to meet air permit conditions, and DEC very wisely rejected the request to burn tires there. There was never a stack test at Norlite And that is because there are no EPA standards on how you burn toxic firefighting foam. This is a highly unusual waste stream. So when it was made public, DEC's public response was, yes, we're working closely with Norlite and the EPA to develop stack test procedures. Well, that consultation was happening, as Joe Ritchie mentioned, and I want to say that I really salute Joe Ritchie's leadership in the community and support all of the concerns that he's raised. So we know 2 million pounds of AFFF were burned while DEC was trying to figure out proper stack test procedures with Norlite and EPA. My understanding is that DEC is currently working closely with EPA, continuing to try to figure out stack test procedures, and in fact, DEC has been working with EPA to figure out stack test procedures at the Chemours facility in North Carolina. Chemours is a spinoff of DuPont. Their recent stack test achieved a 95% destruction efficiency. The Clean Air Act requires 99.9999% destruction efficiency. So if you look at what unfolded at Norlite and Cohoes when 2 million pounds was burned, that would mean if you achieve the 95% destruction efficiency, 100,000 pounds of PFAS would have been released into the air. I appreciate you saying, Sean, and the commissioner saying that you have no intention of allowing AFFF to be burned at Norlite. But the way we need that confirmed is by the governor signing the McDonald-Breslin bill. And I'm not going to ask you what the governor is going to do with the bill, but I do think it's important that everyone tonight understand that the DEC has recommended major changes to the McDonald-Norlite bill in order to get the governor to sign the bill. And the changes are, rather than having a permanent prohibition on burning AFFF at Norlite, which has been stated tonight as your goal, DEC recently has proposed that it would simply be a temporary moratorium until DEC decides that it is safe to burn sometime in the future. So there seems to be a disconnect between what we're being told tonight, that AFFF will never be burned at Norlite, and the advice that the DEC is giving the governor not to sign the bill, but in fact to require that the bill be significantly weakened. So I don't have a question, I have a request that DEC stop advising the governor to gut the McDonald-Breslin bill and provide the long-term protection which this meeting opened with tonight.
Well, thank you for your comment, Judith, and a lot to unpack there. And I think to start, first and foremost, just with regard to sort of the timeline and what we did, again, we started our comprehensive review to really look at, as we spoke about multiple times tonight, our legal and regulatory authorities over the firefighting foam and this unregulated contaminant world that we live in, absent any federal regulation here. And we needed to, step in and figure out the science behind it, which is why we told them to stop first. And with regard to aerial emissions of PFAS, this is an emerging part of the emerging contaminant situation and the PFAS situation in general. And our goal really first was, to figure out, do we have the analytical capabilities to test for these things? And if we don't, how are we going to drive ourselves to get there to really start seeing what comes out of the stacks when you process perfluorinated compounds at varying temperatures, because recognizing the environmental threat that they do pose now and why we've had to get involved in places like Hoosick Falls and Newburgh and elsewhere, because we've seen a release in the environment that's impacted groundwater or water sources and soil. And we know that these do fall out of aerial emissions when not burned at proper temperatures. And our air experts like Tom Gentile began working with EPA to, again, drive the science, because we are a science-based agency. We are a science, and we really have to have science be our guide on this. And if we realize that the federal government is not able to adequately test for these emissions, well, then we need to drive them there. And that's why, again, we told them to stop first, then tried to get the analytical methods in place so that we could do a stack test to determine what may have come out. So then we knew what to analyze for on the ground and at what concentrations and levels to analyze for that would show that there was a release. But now that we've shut the door to that, and that stack testing is not going to occur using this because we don't want them to burn this, we've designed the on-the-ground sampling initiative to really look at those compounds that may have been released. And we're doing a very robust investigation, again, based on our experience. And unfortunately, we've gained a lot of experience in this emerging contaminant realm and with PFAS in general, that we do know what to look for when it comes to aerial deposition or partially incinerated compounds based on, again, our investigations at fire training facilities in certain areas where we know that they used firefighting foam that was partially incinerated, and we know what the marker chemicals are that we need to test for and analyze for. And again, that's going to help us show whether or not, in absence of a stack test, whether or not there was a release in the environment that gives us cause for concern and is going to necessitate on-the-ground actions. And again, that's why we wanted to bring the science to bear and why we've designed the study in the way we did. And, again, just to correct the timeline a little bit, we found out, we investigated, we stopped, we've now designed this test. We tested the waters first to make sure there wasn't an immediate exposure risk. We've told this facility to stop burning. We've put in place the process to make sure that if they take something else that isn't a regulated hazardous waste or an emerging contaminant-containing item, they have to come to us first before they start processing it, again, giving us greater leverage over this facility. And now, we're moving forward on all the other actions that we spoke about tonight. And, again, with regard to the legislation, our advice to the governor is one of science. And, they ask us scientific questions. They want to take a comprehensive, holistic look across the state. We don't take strong positions on legislation, and we're not negotiating with that. We're providing the expertise that we have to bring to bear on this. And I think it's a mischaracterization of anything that we may be doing, because, again, irrespective of that bill, our goal and commitments are what we've outlined to the community tonight, and they're exactly the steps that we're taking on the ground. And as the commissioner said, we're here with you. We're not going anywhere. This department is here working on your behalf day in and day out, and that's our goal moving forward here with the community, and we're not going to stop. So appreciate your comments tonight. I hope that just provides a little more specificity on the timeline. I know Tom Gentile's on the line. He's one of the foremost experts really in the state and country with regard to this. I'm not going to put him on the spot, but in the future, at future sessions, I know he's more than happy to go into some of these other analyses that we've been driving EPA to undertake to, again, really understand from an analytical scientific standpoint what comes out of the stacks when you process this at different temperatures at different facilities, and what are the thresholds that you get to where you get total destruction of these compounds, because that's honestly what we want to drive towards if we're seeing it, because we don't want to see any compounds re-released into the environment in some way. So we're going to continue that work, obviously, because we need to drive this science to improve our regulations, as we constantly do here, in absence of that federal leadership that really hasn't taken place with regard to these compounds. So thanks again for joining us tonight. I know there are a couple other hands raised. I see Chris Savitsky's hand raised. Regina, if you could go to Chris here and let him ask a question.
Hi, Sean. Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I still have a few questions and request some clarification on the stance on the McDonald Breslin bill. You've kind of talked around the, gathering scientific data on the, outcome of combustion in various places. And that seems to be your answer, that you'll be, advising the governor on the effectiveness of complete thermal destruction of PFAS compounds. Is that your answer? Because I wonder whether or not you'd be considering the community's stance on this, that there probably is no safe threshold for this, and that there are alternative methods that are either in place. Like, has DEC investigated the use of supercritical water oxidation methods and other disposal approaches that may be more efficient and safer, and may be done in locations outside of these highly urban areas. So I guess my question is really, is that your answer on the McDonald bill, that you're going to advise in accordance with the science, and if you see that there's acceptable destruction, then that would be your advice to the governor's office?
Well, we are advising on the science, and what was that supercritical? What was that terminology again?
Supercritical water oxidation is a technology that's been scaled up over the last decade or so, and it's been highly effective in destroying organic compounds such as PFAS. Company Battelle has commercialized this. Others have commercialized this approach and show 99.99+% destruction, whereas what we see from the literature, at least, and even in laboratory scale assessments, that the PFAS destruction rates are much are questionable. So I think that there's some variability there, and if you're doing at-scale experiments in places like North Carolina, I really feel bad for the local residents. That's the way that New York State is gathering its information on what's happening in these stacks. But anyway, yes, there are alternative technologies out there. I'm sure your engineers are aware of them. And are they under consideration? Are they being evaluated with the same sort of, urgency as incineration?
Yeah, so Chris, not to put Dan on the spot, but I do want to hear from him on that. But, with regard to, us, unfortunately, again, having to effectuate cleanups across the state here, these emerging contaminants, how we manage them and where they go and what their ultimate disposal is and destruction is something that is super critical and an important part of the equation, because obviously if we take it out of one place, we don't want to see it go to another place. And we are driving the science, overall, on the remediation side of the equation, and then the ultimate disposal side of the equation. And, with perfluorinated compounds, as we started out tonight, being, very widely used in a lot of different products, we are finding it in a lot of different places. And again, it's our responsibility to figure out how we responsibly dispose of it.
I understand. I understand that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, there obviously are, there's great interest in the disposal of these materials, both from the originators and the regulatory perspectives. But again, is there a rush to use incineration as that disposal method as opposed to taking a more cautious approach and looking at alternatives? These things aren't going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
They've been phased out. They're sitting in drums that aren't going anywhere.
Correct, and that's why we are looking at non-thermal treatment of PFAS. Right now, it's very small scale, some of the analytical bench testing that's going on. No real field tests yet at scale. Some things do seem to work in the lab, as Tom Gentile is pointing out to me on the side here, but there's obviously more research that needs to be done. Same on the incineration side of it. We do know the bench testing and modeling that's been done, and the small-scale analytical analysis is getting us to a point where we know certain temperature thresholds reach that 99.9999% destruction method. But again, that's why we need to see what happens in these environments and what comes out, because again, as a responsible regulator, we need to be able to look at a facility like Norlite that have processed something, what's come out of the stacks, what's now on the ground that we may have to deal with, and how do we go about responsibly dealing with that and addressing it. So,
all right, last comment, and I'll let other people with their hands raised go. But you still really haven't addressed the issue of whether or not Norlite will burn this material again. Apparently, that they can apply for the right to burn this in the future. But your commissioner has said on at least 4 occasions that I can remember, including tonight on the record, that they will never burn this material again. Can you differentiate those two statements and come out with a clear comment on exactly what the path forward is for burning AFFF or PFAS compounds in places like Norlite, New York State?
Sure. And again, through, excuse me, Chris, losing my voice here a little bit. Through the actions that we talked about tonight with regard to the letters that we sent, and again, anytime that they want to process an emerging contaminant or something that's not currently regulated, they would have to come in for a permit modification. So I know we talked about the permit process overall, and Nancy went into that, I think, pretty well, as did Ben and Dan. If they want to modify their permit, there is a comprehensive process that's undertaken with regard to that, including community engagement and comments. So I think you're signaling our intention that with regard to these compounds, if there was a permit modification that was sought, we don't think the science is there right now currently to allow us to be able to say that a permit modification would be granted to analyze or to allow that to burn. So that's how we've shut the door from a regulatory standpoint from allowing this to burn, and it's not our intention to allow this to happen again. And again, when we found out that there was this gap in our oversight ability, that's when we took the actions that we did to shut the door to it. And that's, how we've responded. And again, unfortunately, how we've had to respond in absence of this federal leadership and the situation that we've been put in across the state. And I can honestly say, I've been at DEC now for 5 years. And in this 5 years, the majority of issues that I've worked on are emerging contaminants. And this is really, sort of awe-inspiring to see what state New York has done, in absence of the Fed stepping in to regulate these compounds. And again, the experts that we have here have designed an on-the-ground study now to really tell us what may have come out of the stacks from a comprehensive scientific standpoint. Our air engineers are working with other states and the EPA to drive our analytical methods. It's important to remember that 5 years ago, we were just starting to really be able to test these compounds at the levels that we can test for. And in that 5 years, thanks to New York's work, we've really driven that science. And that's what we're going to continue to drive, because it's our responsibility to make sure that we are bringing to bear the right regulation and the right oversight over these compounds overall. And I hope that this presentation tonight has, provided a little bit more clarity onto that. And again, built a little more confidence and trust that we are taking this issue very seriously. We are taking what happened at Norlite very seriously, and the facility overall. We're taking that fresh new look because it's deserved, and you deserve it, and we've heard you loud and clear, and that's how we're moving forward.
Sean, last thing, I guess.
Sure.
One last thing, sorry. I acknowledge that you guys did take some of our comments around study design and really appreciate that. I would echo what Joe said earlier, though. Really, it can't New York State take an even greater leadership position and really just, shutting down these kinds of operations? There's precedent for it around the country. And if you're really going to lead on this, aren't there actions that can be taken, including, allowing bills like this to pass, which are, have no known opposition? That would make your job a lot easier, wouldn't it? If you had laws in place that would allow you to actually curtail the types of dangers that residents like myself and Joe are put in front of us. Really, can't you guys, take an advocacy position on this rather than just a technocratic position?
Well, no, I think, Chris, as you started out, excuse me again, really what we look at as it pertains to regulations is the process that we spoke about tonight. And to take that look at whether or not the facility, should continue to operate, the permit process is the first step in that process that we have to look at. And that's why, as Nancy articulated here, we're going through that process in the way that we are to give that fresh look, to give that community a say. And as Dan and Ben both pointed out, we are, trying to educate you all on that permit process, what those permits allow and how they've been designed, and how we're going to work with you to take that holistic look. And this is the pathway that we have to take as a regulator to regulate this facility, and that's exactly what we're doing here. And, again, I think this is going to be a continuing conversation with you all, and, we very much look forward to engaging you on that. And this is, step one tonight was obviously providing this presentation, really this, virtual walkthrough, which, again, our preference priority would be to do this one-on-one and individually, and we're going to look for more opportunities to do that in the future, hopefully as this pandemic subsides. But appreciate your comments and thoughts and questions. And again, questions like that, especially those that were offered in the chat function tonight, we were going to be compiling those and making sure that there's information up on the website that addresses a lot of that. And again, our doors are open. We're here for these conversations. We're going to continue to work directly with you and on your behalf, because that's what we're here for as your government. So I do see a couple more hands raised right now. Alexis and Regina, if you could unmute Alexis's line, that would be great.
Hello, is it me?
Yes.
Hi, there's two Alexises on the call.
Oh.
Norlite burned 2 million pounds of AFFF from 2018 into December of 2019. And the DEC has said that they ordered Norlite to stop burning AFFF and emerging contaminants. To clarify, you said the DEC launched an investigation when they learned that Norlite was burning AFFF to see if it was, allowed in the permits. They haven't said how long that investigation went on while Norlite was allowed to continue burning AFFF. We still don't know how much time passed before the DEC told Norlite to stop burning AFFF. If the Sierra Club and Earth Justice hadn't submitted a Freedom of Information request and filed a lawsuit, we may never have learned that the AFFF burning ever even happened. Now, I live in north central Troy. I live at 3334 6th Avenue. I'm 1 mile directly west of Norlite in the path of the predominant prevailing winds, which blow from, I'm 1 mile directly east of Norlite. The winds blow from west to east. And my neighborhood is one of the poorest census tracts in the state. The city of Troy is home to 50,000 people, and my neighborhood is 60% Black and brown people, and the median income is just $24,000. Now, in your environmental study, you explicitly explain that you're using control sites to compare your soil and water samples to, which you expect wouldn't have received a heavy exposure. Mr. Ginsburg explained that PFAS exposure can come from a number of household items. So, the justification, it seems, for not doing biological testing is that there are many paths to exposure. Well, when Bennington College released their preliminary study earlier this year, they found PFAS contamination in soil and water downwind from Norlite. The DEC responded that same day that the contamination in the Bennington study was comparable to background levels of PFAS. And I think the DEC cited a University of Vermont study in that comment. As you said earlier, PFAS is pervasive in the environment. Accordingly, your soil and water study will compare the samples where you expect more contamination to those control sites where you expect less contamination. Not no contamination, less contamination. So I would urge the DEC with the DOH to design a study of the residents, especially Saratoga sites because they're so close to Norlite, to design a study of biological testing for PFAS contamination in the residents who live in the path of the dominant prevailing winds, which also includes north central Troy and the entire city of Troy, 50,000 people. And I would urge you to immediately test the Tom Hannock Reservoir, which is the drinking water supply for the city of Troy. So will you commit to testing biologically as quickly as possible the residents who have been exposed to AFFF in their environment, in the air, because isn't burning 2 million pounds of AFFF at an incinerator inside a city something that's worth examining?
Thanks, Alexis. A lot of things to cover there. So first and foremost, and I'll have Dan elaborate on this a little bit more, but the way we've designed the study is to really give us that snapshot we need to first determine if there was a release from that processing of firefighting foam into the environment. And we don't have any evidence of that now. The Bennington College study, yes, in the way the few, I can't even call it a study, but it was a few, grab samples that, confused upwind and downwind and, wasn't comprehensively designed in a way that really shows that there was a release that we can pinpoint to this facility. So what we challenged our research scientists like Dan to do is really develop that study that is going to show us whether or not there was a release to the environment. And we need that information first and foremost to be able to guide any additional scientific analysis, including biomonitoring. And that's what Gary walked through. And, Gary can help elaborate on that too, if you'd like, as we go on here. With regard to the Tom Hannock Reservoir, that is routinely tested. And we also had fairly recent testing results as it pertains to some of the work that we were doing in Hoosick Falls for the municipal water supply study. So we know over time how that's changed, and we did not see any changes, and the finished water in Troy remains non-detect for perfluorinated compounds. So we know there's not an exposure risk from Troy residents, and that's something we obviously have taken very seriously and wanted to look into. Recognizing that we had the data on Troy and the Tom Hannock is why we prioritized the sampling of Cohoes and Green Island, because, again, they were the two most proximate water supplies that didn't have current testing that we wanted to see, again, if those changed over time. And we had the information that we had on the Tom Hannock, which, again, gave us confidence that those water supplies were impacted. And through the MCL work that Gary spoke about, and Gary, I'll just have you elaborate a little bit more on this. Troy is going to be sampled and resampled, periodically moving forward under the new MCL. So we're going to be able to evaluate any changes there. But Dan or Gary, do you want to touch on and elaborate more on anything I just did in response to that question?
I think you did pretty well, Sean, on the the locations of sampling. This study is to try and find the places, that we really think we have the best chance of finding effects. And this is the beginning, and, doesn't mean it's the end. So depending on how, what the data shows us, that may lead us to decide to take samples further away, if we see that that's needed to, determine what the effects were.
Yeah, and this is Gary Ginsberg, and I appreciate the question. Certainly, the Norlite facility represents something that people in the community see. Perhaps you could sometimes see an emission from it, and it'll certainly raise questions. But what we are focusing on in this environmental sampling plan are the locations where, looking at weather patterns and what tends to be the predominant wind flow that would suggest where there could have been deposition during this 2-year period, and also what is closest by, for example, Saratoga sites, focusing extra sampling there to make sure that we understand what the closest, most immediate airborne impact could have been. And unfortunately, but fortunately, sort of a two-edged sword, these compounds are very environmentally stable, and they will tend to hang out in and stay in soil for decades. And so if there was that fingerprint from the last 2 years of combustion, it should be evident in a well-designed study as this one is. So, we want to see, what the best sampling plan can show us in the first term. Look at all this and then evaluate, what we know, what data gaps or questions we're identifying. Looking at human testing for these compounds in blood is going to lead to more questions than answers unless you have a clear environmental signal from which this exposure pathway would lead to that study. And so until we have that, it doesn't make sense to go beyond. In every other biomonitoring study that I have seen, populations and the ones that we've conducted in New York State, we had a clear environmental signal to follow. And that's what we're looking for here.
Thanks, Gary. So, Alexis, hope that was helpful in walking through exactly how we would approach this. And Dan, thanks again for your points on that as well. And with regard to the Bennington College study, the first thing our experts did was dive in very deeply on that, because we, as responsible regulators, wanted to make sure that we weren't missing something with regard to the data that they presented. And we did produce a comprehensive response to that. And, while we haven't posted that on our website, I think maybe we will after this, because I think that will help articulate some of what Dan and Gary both spoke about this evening as well. And again, reinforces how we've designed our study moving forward. And again, we, as this study goes underway, we're going to be working directly with you and reporting out what we found and where this is leading to next. So, obviously stay tuned for more of that coming up. So I see Dave P. has his hand raised, and I think that's the last one we've got for this evening. So, Regina, if you could unmute Dave P. and we'll take his question.
Hi, Sean. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So my question/comment has expanded as I've been listening here. I want to support what Chris Savinsky said earlier about you essentially taking a pretty technocratic approach to this, which I think is probably misplaced. All right, starting in on my first point. Norlite has extensive violations on record already, okay? The latest one that was pretty well detailed is that EPA report in May. Clearly, you guys will not award any credibility to Bennington College, but I would expect that you would do at least that to the EPA. And yet, every time I hear Commissioner Sagos talk about the permit process, he states it as though it's a fait accompli that they will get their permit renewed. It's not that, he never mentions the idea of them having it rejected. It's always, in the future, once, the general population has gone back to sleep on this, we'll be there monitoring all this. And that is really extremely troubling to people like myself who live in the area and who have come to know the people at Saratoga sites. So, second point, blood testing. I was rereading earlier today articles in Politico and the Times-Union about how the Cuomo administration handled the Hoosick Falls testing of blood, and that that dragged on for 18 months. It was unnecessarily delayed, and when I couple that with what I've come to know through people like Jane Williams about firefighters showing a chemical fingerprint from the AFFF exposure, 10 years after that last exposure, it just seems like you guys are dragging your feet about something. I mean, like you talk about like testing the soil as though that's going to reveal something, and I just think in terms of like forensics. Okay, it's like in the forensics analogy is that you have someone who is physically bleeding in front of you, and yet you're scraping the sidewalk looking for traces of gunpowder, right? You should be testing the victim. And those are the people who were breathing the air for the last 2 years around that incinerator. Their bodies are the filters that are pulling this stuff out of the air that they breathe. And the last point that I want to make is, you're talking about in reaction to Alexis' point about the Tomahawk or Tomahawk, however you pronounce it. It relies on the premise that you actually have the capability to test for what you want to, what you expect to find. But there are 5,000 types of these chemicals, plus whatever new combinations concocted in the actual incineration process. So it's really quite dubious, the idea that you're actually going to find what's there that could be harmful to people on a day-to-day basis. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your comments there, Dave. Obviously, Well, I think first and foremost, not to insult our science staff here, but I think we take pride in being technocrats because we are scientists by nature and we're grounded in science. And again, we're moving forward, as always, responsibly on behalf of New Yorkers from a scientific basis because that's what we have to do. And that's the way our laws and regulations have been crafted. And we need that science to be able to effectively oversee and protect New Yorkers like you from these things. And I didn't really follow your analogy overall because, again, what we have here is we have to determine was there a release to the environment that could cause an exposure to occur. And we don't have evidence right now that there is an exposure. We have evidence that, yes, a facility processed an emerging contaminant in their processes, but we don't know if anything came out of the stacks. And now we need to design the science to determine did something come out of the stacks and were people exposed? And then that's going to give us the ammunition that we need to hold this facility accountable and do more of that testing right now. And I think Gary has articulated a few different times tonight, the process that we need to follow with regard to biomonitoring and why you lead with the analytical on-the-ground sampling first to really show that there was a release or an exposure pathway. This is how it's our stepwise approach. It's our technocratic approach because this is what we've designed as your government to make sure that we're adequately protecting you and residents like you all across the state. So, I appreciate everyone sticking around here late tonight and keeping this conversation going. Again, this was our first of more to come. And, based on the questions that we had received, we hope that we did design an effective walkthrough that was informative, give you a chance to hear just from some of the experts that we have working on your behalf day in and day out here for the department. I'd like to thank Dan, Nancy, Ben, Gary, and others. Special thanks to Regina Willis, who helped facilitate the presentation tonight, and appreciate everyone sticking around. Again, this presentation was recorded this evening. We're going to make sure that the QA in the chat that we didn't get a chance to get to our address and will be posted on our website along with this recording. And again, we're going to keep this conversation going moving forward with you. I hope this did help in reiterate and rebuild a little bit of the trust on behalf of New York State and specifically DEC and DOH. Because our experts are working on your behalf day in and day out here and making sure that we're doing what's right. And anytime we do uncover and discover, any lapse or changes or things that we need to step in and address with regard to our regulations or laws or anything, we take immediate actions. And that's exactly what we've done here tonight. And that's what we're going to continue to do on your behalf. So thank you, everyone. Mayor Keeler, thank you again for co-hosting this with us tonight and giving us this chance to have this community conversation. And again, we look forward to continuing this moving forward with Cohoes and beyond. So thank you all, and I wish you all a good night.